Chapter 985. Tantua Xidigarba was the most powerful Xidigarba. The pennant of human skulls in his hand was the most powerful Xidigarba in hell. The sweet dew seal contained infinite mercy, which hurt the poisoned Sang Sang. Ning Kei's body was torn by the countless skulls on the Tantua. He was wounded everywhere and his clothes were torn and bleeding. Countless resentful souls were summoned by the sutra and flowed to him along the river, desperately drilling into his wounds. Although they were purified by the divine light contained in his blood as soon as they touched his blood, the wounds remained and became more and more serious. The edges of the wounds gradually turned gray. His eyes were also bleeding, but they were still so calm without any fear or pain. It seemed that he did not even have any thoughts. He was extremely ruthless and cold. Because the eyes were emotions, Sang Sang's emotions. The bone elephant was dozens of feet high and had a large head. Sang Sang landed on its head as if she had landed in a very spacious house, which made her figure look so small. Sang Sang walked to the back of the elephant, getting closer and closer to Xidigarba. The bone elephant roared angrily, and its trunk broke out of the river and lashed at her like a whip. Ning Kei's initial thought was right. There were no bones in the elephant's trunk. Even the elephants in the Styx River in hell did not have bones. The elephant had a long trunk made of white bones because it could not forget its previous life after coming to Buddha's nirvana. So it picked up countless broken bones from the mud at the bottom of the river and made a trunk for itself. The broken bones in the elephant's trunk were all human bones. The bone elephant had been listening to sutras in the Styx River for tens of thousands of years and had already refined these human bones into its own magic weapon. Its Buddha's power was boundless, so it could easily tie up Vermilion Bird and Ning Quebec. Even if they were at the peak of knowing destiny state, they could not break free. In the roar, the bone trunk was like a white shadow, lashing at Sang Sang. It was as powerful as the Vajra in Buddha's hand. The river was turbulent. Once one was lashed, he would definitely die and his soul would be scattered. Countless skeletons and resentful souls in the river had been killed by the trunk of the bone elephant. Seeing this scene, they instinctively felt fear and did not dare to continue watching. Sang Sang did not look either. It was as if she did not know that the bone elephant was attacking her and that the trunk made of human bones was about to fall on her body. She continued to move forward expressionlessly. She took a step forward and stepped on the elephant's trunk. This stomp seemed simple, but in fact, it was mysterious beyond words. It was as if the bone elephant had extended its nose there, waiting for her to step on it. A miserable howl resounded through the nether river. The bone elephant was in great pain. It shook its head desperately and used all its strength to pull its trunk out of Sang Sang's feet. Half of the trunk was broken and the white bones flew everywhere. Sang Sang walked to the front of Xidigarba Bodhisattva and held the hilt of the iron knife. Xidigarba Bodhisattva looked at her quietly. The pennant of human skulls in his hand suddenly became hundreds of times bigger. It covered the entire world at the bottom of the river and then fell on her head. The clear river water became dark and gloomy again as if night had come. Countless sharp and unpleasant screeches resounded in the night, and countless skulls were roaring angrily. Each skull represented a follower that Xidigarba Bodhisattva had subdued. The countless skulls on the banner of human skulls represented the consciousness of countless followers, as well as their unwillingness. More wounds appeared on Ning Kei's body, and his eardrums ruptured instantly. If he had not mastered the Great Spirit and had a strong body like the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine, he would have been torn into pieces by the screeches. The real terrible damage was not on his body but on his heart. His heart suddenly beat faster like a rainstorm. It beat thousands of times every breath and it could break at any time. Ning Kei was very conscious. He was in great pain and fear. His survival instinct made him want to leave the horrible pennant of human skulls and return to the sunken ship, away from the bone elephant. But he could not do it. It was Sang Sang who controlled his body now. Sang Sang did not care what kind of damage this body was suffering, nor did she care that this body could be destroyed at any time. Her eyes were still cold and calm. She looked at the pennant of human skulls in Xidigarba Bodhisattva's hand and shouted, "So noisy!" Her shout was like thunder, echoing in the dark river bottom and suppressing the chanting of countless resentful souls. The countless skulls hanging on the edge of the pennant of human skulls were shocked and instantly became quiet. After a while, these skulls came to their senses and screamed even more angrily. Suddenly, there were countless tiny cracking sounds on the pennant of human skulls. Countless skulls were shaken into extremely fine bone powder, which was carried away by the river and could no longer make any sound. These skulls were shattered by their own screeches. Sang Sang said that these skulls were too noisy. Since they dared to disobey her and continued to make noise, they would die. This was the will of Haotian. Sang Sang pulled out the iron cutlass and slashed at Xidigarbha. With a swish, the blade cut the Kasaya on Xidigarbha and cut off countless golden threads. It cut the Dharmakaya of Xidigarbha to death, but only left a slight cut. Golden blood slowly oozed out but did not flow down. Sang Sang was not happy, so Ning Ke frowned. She reached out her right hand and put it on Xidigarbha's chest. She pulled out the iron arrow from Xidigarbha's back with an unpredictable and magical method. Looking at the golden blood on the iron arrow, Sang Sang was a little disgusted. She took out the iron bow and put an arrow on it. She aimed the dark and sharp arrowhead at Xidigarbha's eyebrows and even touched it. An aura spread around and shrouded the skeletal elephant. The pennant of human skulls was broken and drifted away with the river, but it did not drift away as if there was an invisible barrier blocking it. Sang Sang opened her world. The pennant of human skulls, the skeletal elephant, and Xidigarbha on the back of the elephant were all in her world. No one could escape and no one could resist her will. She aimed the iron arrow at Xidigarbha's eyebrows, but Xidigarbha failed to dodge. Xidigarbha held the front end of the iron arrow with his left hand. Sang Sang quietly looked at him under the arrow, and a divine thought fell into the iron arrow. Xidigarbha looked solemn and chanted the name of Buddha. Sang Sang loosened her fingers, and the iron arrow left the bowstring. The arrow did not move. Xidigarbha held the shaft of the iron arrow, and the golden light in his left hand shone brightly. The skeletal elephant let out a cry and slowly sank. The bone of its right forelimb was broken from the middle. It was so quiet between Sang Sang and Xidigarbha, as if the iron arrow had not been shot. In fact, the power of the iron arrow had been fully released. Sang Sang put away the bow, held the iron arrow in her right hand, and sent it forward again. She turned her divine thought into the bow and arrow. There was a light puff. Xidigarbha's eyebrows finally broke, and a drop of golden blood oozed out, like a mole. The mole formed by the golden blood floated away from the Xidigarbha's eyebrows, and slowly but unstoppably floated forward in the river. Finally, it fell on Ning Ke's eyebrows and Sang Sang's heart. The golden blood touched Ning Ke's body, and the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession took effect. Ning Ke spat out a mouthful of blood in pain, but Sang Sang was still unmoved. She held the iron arrow in her hand and continued to send it forward. More golden blood gushed out of Xidigarbha's eyebrows, and his injury became more and more serious. At the same time, the light of Buddha in the golden blood made Ning Ke feel more and more pain. Who would die first? Xidigarbha looked at Ning Ke, who was covered in blood, and Haotian in his body. He said with a merciful expression, "Buddha will be happy to exchange his broken body for Haotian's death." Sang Sang was expressionless. She took another step forward and the iron arrow went deeper. Xidigarbha could no longer maintain his calm and merciful expression. His face was full of fear and confusion. He roared and released the sweet dew madra with his right hand, which was glowing with golden light, and hit Ning Ke's chest with his palm. Sang Sang ignored him and continued to take another step forward. The iron arrow in her hand pierced deeply into Xidigarbha's eyebrows. Golden Buddha's blood splashed everywhere, and the Buddha's power suddenly dispersed. Before dying, Xidigarbha's eyes were a little confused, because he couldn't understand why she dared to bet her life with him, the most noble Haotian who had endless life. He didn't know that Sang Sang and Ning Ke were originally going to bet their lives with Buddha. The skeletal elephant retreated to the depths of the dark river. Its right forelimb was broken and it walked very slowly. As it retreated, it kept shaking the remaining half of its nose, which seemed to be in great pain. Xidigarbha sat on the back of the skeletal elephant with his eyes closed. Looking at this scene, the wraiths and skeletons at the bottom of the river whispered, as if they couldn't believe what they saw. When they looked at the sunken ship, they became very quiet. Ning Ke's body was shaken back to the sunken ship by Xidigarbha's last palm. Looking at the skeletal elephant disappearing into the darkness, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell on the ship. Sang Sang gave up the control of this body. Ning Ke opened his eyes and asked worriedly, "Is he okay?" Sang Sang said, "If he didn't retreat he might be okay." But he did. Ning Ke had been watching the battle and he knew very well that Sang Sang was very weak now. If Xidigarbha could maintain his state of mind he might not lose and even both of them might be injured. Looking at the direction where the skeletal elephant disappeared, he sighed and said, "It is said that Xidigarbha is merciful and resolute. I didn't expect that he would be a coward who was afraid of death in the end. He is indeed a fake bodhisattva." The sunken ship rose and the river separated to make a road, revealing the sky above the river. The rain clouds had dispersed, and the water in the ship flowed cleanly between the waterways. The water walls on both sides were very clear and no fish could be seen. But the wraiths with vague faces and countless skeletons could be seen. Those wraiths were slightly more intelligent, but they didn't dare to do anything. They just looked at them in confusion and fear, while the skeletons instinctively stretched out their bone hands, trying to stop the people on the ship. Sang Sang controlled the body for a while, and Ning Kei's consciousness became more and more intertwined with hers. Looking at those stretched out bone hands, he casually waved his sleeves and a clear light fell, and the bone hands were instantly purified. No more skeletons dared to approach the water wall. The wraiths floated in the water and the ship sailed between the water walls. He remembered the scene when he crossed the river with Sang Sang. It was not as beautiful, but it was very strange. The ship reached the other side and ran aground on the mudflat. Ning Kei carried Sang Sang's body on his back, and walked to the woods in the east with the iron cutlass. When he came to the woods, he looked back at the river that was as calm as a mirror. He had a lot of fear but also a lot of pride. Xidigarbha was dead, who could stop him? At this moment, the light of Buddha gradually shone in the dark sky west of the river, and the sound of chanting came from the hundreds of miles of redwood forest that had been leveled by him with talisman. He knew that countless Buddhas from the Nirvana world had come again. He shouted to that side, "Come and chase me across the river if you can." The title of this chapter is so simple that I feel embarrassed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 986. At the end of last month and a few days ago, I had reported in advance that I will be returning to Hubei to settle some personal matters. Some of the more important matters are more important than work, and the updates will definitely slow down. I will try my best to keep updating. When I am free, I will try my best to write 2 chapters. If I can write 3 chapters, I will definitely keep the manuscript. I will leave at around 5 a.m. If everything goes smoothly, I should be able to reach home at around 4 p.m. After a day of traveling, I will naturally be tired. I will try my best to write 1 chapter first. In the next 10 days or so, it will be more common to write 1 chapter at night. This will be a return to 1 chapter. It might be slightly harder for me, but I can handle it. I have experience writing 200,000 words. Everyone, please encourage, be tolerant, be more understanding, work together and return to 1. It will still be the same sentence. This month, I hope that everyone can read happily and vote easily. I am still first in the monthly votes rankings now. I hope that I will be first in the end. This is also a return to 1. There should not be any more individual chapters in the next few days. I should hurry up and shout a few more times. Those bad guys behind are catching up. There are only a few tens of votes left. Everyone hurry up and vote. Save me. My throat is broken. Monthly votes. Why do I need a bicycle? Thank you. To be continued. If you like this novel, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 987. I want to cross the river. Who will carry me? Let me carry you. Ning Kei hummed a tune and walked to the woods by the river with his sister on his back. He was so happy that he was crazy. After crossing the hurdle of Xidigarbha Bodhisattva, the pressure that he had accumulated these days was naturally released wildly. There were still countless Buddhas looking for him and Sang Sang in the field west of the river. They wanted to kill him and Sang Sang, but he believed that those Buddhas could not cross the river because there were countless resentful souls and skeletons in the river. Those skeletons were not smart, but they were powerful. Without the command of Xidigarbha Bodhisattva, they could not distinguish between friend and foe and would not let go of those Buddhas. It should be known that the light of Buddha could suppress ghosts and was also an excellent nourishment for ghosts. Ning Kei and Sang Sang could purify with Hao Yan's divine light, but those Buddhas could not. When they reached the woods, the song suddenly stopped. Ning Kei knelt down in the moss-covered ground with a thud. He held the wetland with both hands and kept vomiting blood. His face turned pale because of the pain. Xidigarbha Bodhisattva was not easy to kill. It was not until then that he found that his body was seriously injured, like a battlefield after a bloody battle. There were wounds and blood everywhere, and it was very difficult to find an intact bone. As for the psyche power in his sense of perception, it was even more chaotic. He turned around with difficulty and sat down against a redwood tree. He panted hard and held Sang Sang in his arms. He said, "I felt a little unreliable just now. You were too fierce when you fought." Sang Sang said in his heart, "What do you think? This is my body. No matter what, you should take care of it." Ning Kei thought of the bloody battle between her and Xidigarbha Bodhisattva. She did not even blink when Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's powerful pennant of human skulls ruined her body. Sang Sang said, "That's why I should take care of it." Ning Ke said angrily, "You can only win by risking your life. Do you think I don't know that? I just want you to say something nice. We have become one. Why can't you say something intimate?" He meant something else when he said, "become one." Sang Sang said, "Even if I break your body, what can I do?" Ning Ke was furious. He turned her over and spanked her buttocks twice. He scolded, "If there's a next time, I won't go easy on your body." Sang Sang seemed to be a little tired and no longer paid attention to him. The quarrel became a quarrel between the two of them. Naturally, it was boring. He leaned against the tree trunk and looked at the scenery on the other side of the river to kill time. Logically speaking, he should be in a hurry to meditate to heal his injuries and restore his psyche power, but he did nothing. As time passed, his injuries naturally healed. Hao Tian had merged with him. In terms of life recovery, who could be better than him? Ning Ke stood up and was about to leave with Sang Sang on his back. Suddenly, he saw many Buddha lights in the redwood forest on the other side of the river, and then he heard the chanting of scriptures. Every golden light was a Buddha, and it was a Buddha that they had met and injured. Naturally, the number of Buddhas in the redwood forest was far more than what he saw. Ning Ke was not in a hurry, thinking that these Buddhas could not cross the river. He smiled and looked at the other side of the river and even waved to the Buddha at the front. The Buddha was an acquaintance. When he and Sang Sang went to the opera in Chaoyang City, he always bought tickets from this Buddha. Until now, he still did not know who this Buddha was. The dark sky gradually brightened, the riverbank gradually brightened, the Buddha lights gradually brightened, and the chanting of scriptures gradually became solemn. For a moment, no one knew how many Buddhas came to the Styx River and looked at the other side in silence. Ning Ke's expression became solemn. Even with his eyesight, he could not count how many Buddhas there were. What shocked him even more was that those Buddhas actually began to walk into the Styx River. Thousands, tens of thousands, or even more Buddhas bypassed the fallen redwood trees, walked across the soft riverbank and silently walked into the clear river. It was dark, as if an army was crossing the river. There were more resentful spirits and skeletons in the depths of the Styx River. They sensed the Buddha lights and aura on these Buddhas, but did not sense the coercion of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. After a moment of hesitation, they finally failed to suppress their instinctive love for light and their greed for the pure aura of Buddha. The clear river water turned black at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the calm surface of the river suddenly became extremely turbulent. Some Buddhas with low cultivation were directly swept away by the river water and became food for the resentful spirits, while the Buddhas with high cultivation were surrounded by dozens or even hundreds of resentful spirits, constantly devouring them. The scene was extremely terrifying. What puzzled Ning Ke was that none of the Buddhas made a sound during the whole process. They silently entered the water, silently were swept away, silently were devoured, and silently turned into countless golden light fragments. They even stopped chanting the Buddhist scriptures that had a strong suppressive effect on resentful spirits and wild ghosts, as if they were deliberately courting death. Dozens of Buddhas with profound dharma did the same. If they used their means, they could save the Buddhas who were sinking into hell, not to mention to protect themselves. But they did nothing. They just put their palms together and silently walked into the depths of the Styx River. Countless Buddhas walked into the vast and gloomy Styx River and floated in the river, densely packed together. From time to time, Buddhas were swept away by the water, dragged away by resentful spirits, and torn into pieces by the white claws of skeletons. Looking at this shocking scene, Ning Ke no longer felt like an army crossing the river. He felt like he was on the prairie, where countless bison crossing the river were devoured by crocodiles. Why were these Buddhas so silent and so calm to die? Ning Ke even saw a Buddha among the black waves being devoured by resentful spirits, but the Buddha's expression was still so determined. At this moment, the earth suddenly shook. Ning Ke suddenly turned around and looked at the source of the shaking. He saw that the sky in the far east suddenly became unusually bright, and there was a supreme Buddha's power rising there. The boundless light of Buddha instantly came to the Styx River, illuminating the woods and all the lives by the woods. The light fell and plated Ning Ke's clothes with a layer of golden light. He felt a very strong pressure and also felt that Sang Sang was weakening, so he quickly opened the big black umbrella. The light of Buddha also fell into the Styx River. The dark water did not become clear, but it tumbled rapidly, as if someone had put a fire under the Styx River and instantly boiled the Styx River. In the boiling Styx River, countless Buddhas were still silently moving forward. Countless resentful spirits that were devouring Buddha's aura raised their heads and looked at the light of Buddha in a daze. Countless skeletons that were tearing Buddha's body stopped what they were doing and wanted to look at the light of Buddha, but they were a little timid. Then, both resentful spirits and skeletons gradually turned into tiny light spots. The densely packed light spots, like fireflies, floated in the boiling river and landed on the bodies of the Buddhas who were still alive. The Buddha's aura was suddenly enhanced, and the expressions on their faces became more resolute. They walked towards the Buddha's aura in the distant east towards the other shore. 10,000 Buddhas paying homage? Ninkei said to himself. 10,000 ghosts crossing the river? Sang Sang said contemptuously. Whether it was 10,000 Buddhas paying homage or 10,000 ghosts crossing the river, Ninkei did not know why these Buddhas were doing this, nor did he understand why ghosts attached themselves to Buddhas after Buddhas were devoured by ghosts. But he knew that these Buddhas had become stronger and more terrifying. He even saw thousands of resentful spirits in the boiling river turn into an indigo lion, and an inconspicuous Buddha was carried by the indigo lion and walked on the river. Was it another bodhisattva? One Ksitigarbha bodhisattva had almost driven Ninkei and Sang Sang into a desperate situation and had to wash their bodies in the Styx River. How could they survive if several bodhisattvas of similar states appeared? What else was there to think at this time? The light of Buddha in the far east gradually faded, and countless Buddhas and bodhisattvas were about to reach the other shore. Ninkei turned around and began to run wildly with Sang Sang on his back. He ran wildly all the way for 100 days. Even Ninkei himself did not know how far he had run in the past 100 days with Sang Sang on his back. He only knew that he was running desperately to leave those Buddhas and bodhisattvas behind him as far as possible. During the running journey, there were plateau meadows, land inland seas and steep mountains. He did not know where he was but only knew that he was running toward the far east. From the fourth day on he could no longer hear the chanting behind him. Occasionally when he looked back he could not see the light of Buddha in the night sky. But he knew that those Buddhas would never stop running. As long as he stopped or slowed down, they would catch up with him one day. Those Buddhas were born in the year of tortoise. The world was so vast that he could not see the end of it after running wildly for 100 days. Fortunately, he did not need to distinguish the direction, nor did he need to worry about running back to the original place, because Buddha was in front of him. The light of Buddha was getting clearer and clearer, which meant that Buddha was getting closer and closer. What was strange was that the light of Buddha did not hurt him and Sang Sang like the previous times, but made them feel a little comfortable. Although they felt comfortable, they were not relaxed. Ninkei and Sang Sang talked less and less these days, and they kept silent for a long time while running. He was in a heavy mood because he was about to see Buddha and gamble with his life, while Sang Sang was thinking about something. To cultivate Buddhism, one must first see Buddha, and Buddha would wake up from the nirvana state either alive or dead. Heaven was the first, Headmaster was the second, and Buddha was the third. Now Sang Sang was extremely weak. If Buddha was alive, she and Ninkei would definitely die. Ninkei and Sang Sang were born with each other, so he should know what she was thinking. But this time her thoughts were too complicated and abstruse. He could sense those lines of thought, but it was too dense to see clearly, let alone understand. It was like a tangled mess between their hearts. Understanding this, his mood became heavier and heavier. Even Sang Sang could not figure out a way. What should they do after seeing Buddha? One day they came to a meadow and a snow-capped peak loomed in the distance. He broke the silence and said, "When I first learned cultivation I gambled, which meant that I was probably born to be a gambler. Now it is a 50-50 chance, so of course I have the courage to bet all my wealth. I'm home. I haven't had a good rest for a day and a night. I'm very tired." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 988. A few days later, Ninkei carried Sang Sang to a place dozens of miles away from the snow mountain. The fields here were covered with green grass and there were thousands of lakes and ponds. The paths between the ponds were like lines. There were trees and willows beside each pond. There were flowers and lotuses on the ponds. The lotuses were white and red as if they were dyed with blood. The green leaves were like skirts and the stems were golden. It was extremely beautiful. There were countless golden lights above the thousands of ponds, rising from everything. The lotuses, branches, leaves, willows, stones, and even the ponds were all emitting golden light. It was the light of Buddha. The light of Buddha was too bright and the scene was too beautiful. Ninkei lowered the big black umbrella, but he could not avoid the ubiquitous light. He squinted his eyes. Because of Sang Sang's poisoning, his chest and abdomen were full of disgust, and there was sweetness in his throat from time to time, which was a sign of vomiting blood. The indescribably beautiful and holy world was the real Buddha land. He was very sure that Buddha lived in this world, but he did not know where he was. He carried Sang Sang on his back and searched among the ponds. He stepped on the narrow mud path between the ponds, pushed aside the willow branches in front of him, and looked back and forth between the lotuses, lakes and stones, looking extremely patient. Sang Sang kept silent and watched him search aimlessly for a long time. Finally she could not help but ask, "Do you know where Buddha is?" Ning Ke said, "I don't know." Sang Sang said, "Then what's the point of looking around like this?" Ning Ke said, "Buddha will wake up as long as I see him. So looking is searching." Seeing Buddha was enough. He walked through the golden ponds with Sang Sang on his back. He looked at the lotuses on the ponds, the clear water in the ponds, the mud at the bottom, the lotus roots in the mud, the stones on the banks of the ponds, the willows among the stones and the golden cicadas on the willows. He rarely blinked because he did not dare to miss anything. One day, hearing the croaking sounds coming from the lotus field, he thought for a moment and untied Sang Sang's body. Then he jumped into the water, swam to the depths of the lotus field and caught a fat frog. He held the frog in front of his eyes and stared at it for a long time. The frog innocently opened its round eyes and stared back at him. The man and the frog stared at each other for a long time. In the end, Ning Ke's eyes began to ache and he silently shed tears. Sang Sang mocked him in his heart, "Even if you think what you did was stupid, why do you have to cry?" Ning Ke explained angrily, "My eyes are sore." Sang Sang said, "It's your fault for staring at me for so long." Ning Ke said, "I've seen so many flowers and willows without any reaction. After thinking about it, the frog in the pond is most likely to be the Buddha. Of course I have to look at it more." Sang Sang was a little confused and asked, "How could Buddha be a frog?" Ning Ke said seriously, "According to the Buddhist scriptures, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva also confirmed that Buddha was a prince of a small country in the secular world, so it is natural that he could become a frog." Sang Sang was even more puzzled and asked, "What's the relationship between the frog and the prince?" Ning Ke said, "The frog prince. Haven't you heard of such a famous story?" Sang Sang remembered and said, "Is it the fairy tale you told me when I was young?" Ning Ke nodded and said, "Isn't the prince turning into a frog some kind of hint?" Sang Sang said, "Then you still have to kiss it?" Ning Ke was so focused on finding Buddha that he didn't hear the sarcasm in her words. After hesitating for a while, he really raised the frog in front of his eyes and kissed it. The frog didn't change at all, but it looked a little aggrieved. Ning Ke wiped his mouth and spat a lot of saliva into the pond. He said, "It seems that it is not this one." Sang Sang said, "There are at least tens of thousands of frogs here." Ning Ke looked at the thousands of golden ponds and listened to the cicadas in the willow trees and the frogs in the lotus fields. He thought that there might be more than tens of thousands of frogs. Not to mention the golden cicadas in the willow trees, that was Third Sister's livelihood. If he had to kiss all these frogs, how swollen would his mouth be? What if he kissed a toad? He was not a swan. After searching for several days he still found nothing. According to his calculation, those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas all over the mountains and fields should be catching up soon. He became a little anxious. The golden ponds occupied a large field, and in the middle was the towering snow mountain. The mountain peak had been covered by ice and snow for many years. The thick layer of snow fell from the peak to the foot of the mountain, and the original color of the cliff could not be seen at all. Trickles of water flowed down from the snow and moistened the field. That was how the thousands of ponds came to be. Under the dark sky, the snow-white mountain was surrounded by thousands of golden ponds, which looked extremely spectacular and beautiful. One day Ning Ke found the foot of the mountain and forgot what he had said when he looked up. He remembered that the Prajna peak where the Shenkong temple was located was transformed by the body of Buddha left in the human world. Buddha seemed to like to compare himself with a mountain, so was it possible that the snow mountain was Buddha? The golden ponds and golden lotus branches in the field, as well as other things, all emitted the light of Buddha. Was it because of the snow water? After thinking for a while, he denied his own inference. The snow mountain could be seen from hundreds of miles away. These days he occasionally looked at the snow mountain in the golden ponds, but the snow mountain never moved. Naturally it was not Buddha. "Hey, if you are Buddha, answer me." Ning Ke looked at the snow mountain and shouted. The snow mountain was silent, and only his voice kept echoing and lingering. He laughed at himself, turned around and walked towards the next pond. However, he did not go far before he suddenly stopped. A voice sounded behind him. It was not the echo of the snow mountain because the voice was very loud and roaring. It came from a very high place like a thunder falling from the sky. Ning Ke turned to look at the snow mountain. His face suddenly became pale and his body became stiff. The voice came from the top of the snow mountain. It was the sound of avalanche. The snow layer kept collapsing and countless snowflakes fell. The snowline at the front accumulated higher and higher, like a huge wave. The friction between the snow layer and the cliff made a terrible sound like thunder. The field began to shake violently as if there was an earthquake. The water in the golden ponds trembled and then began to jump with the golden light of Buddha, like a goddess dancing. The wind roared and the willows beside the ponds bent down. The lotus leaves in the ponds fluttered, and the lotuses bloomed more vigorously. The frogs and golden cicadas kept chirping, as if they were ready to welcome the birth of a great being. The avalanche was still going on. Ning Ke stood on the trembling field, looking at the peak that gradually revealed its true appearance and the black cliff covered with snow. He suddenly thought of the highest peak by the hot sea in the north of the human world. He thought that the snow mountain was both the end and the beginning, and vaguely understood something. His face became paler and his body stiffer. He held the hilt tightly in his right hand and put his left hand in front of his chest, communicating with Sang Sang in his body, waiting for the final judgment. The avalanche lasted for a very long time before it gradually quieted down. Under the dark sky, the snow mountain was no longer what it used to be. There was not much snow left in the black rocks, and the outline of the snow mountain could be vaguely seen. If the snow mountain was a statue, it would naturally have an outline. After the avalanche, Buddha finally showed his true body. He sat cross-legged between heaven and earth, and the top of the snow mountain was the Buddha's face. The lines were very rough and blurred, giving people a feeling that it was fake. Today's update is 2,000 words. I have to write tomorrow's. I can't write tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 989. After the snow fell, the mountain was still the same mountain. It looked no different from any mountain in the human world or in this world. The exposed black cliff stones were nothing special. They were either rough or smooth, without luster or aura of life. They were silent, cliff stones. Ning Ke stood in front of the mountain with Sang Sang on his back and looked at the true appearance of the mountain for a long time. It was still a mountain until the gold on the golden pond was blown into countless pieces by the night wind. Did Buddha wake up? Was Buddha alive or dead? He was waiting for the answer but did not know what it was, which made him very nervous and confused. Did we win the bet? It seems not. Why? Ning Ke was very disappointed and angry. He sat on the ground and kept kicking his legs like a wronged child or a wronged frog, kicking the snow in front of him everywhere. Sang Sang said calmly, because Buddha is Buddha, not a cat. Hearing this, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He understood that from the very beginning, his and Sang Sang's conjecture was different from the truth. The ideal experiment about the cat required a box and a delicate poisoning device. There was no reason for Buddha to trap himself in that situation. Then what was nirvana? Nirvana was still a superposition state of quantum, but it had nothing to do with life and death. It was only related to the position. When you observed, it suddenly appeared there or here. Buddha did not design the device that might poison himself, but he could design other ways to make Hao Yin not find him. We still won. Ning Ke stood up and looked at the mountain in front of him. He said, yes, Buddha is here. This mountain is Buddha. Just destroy it. Sang Sang said, no, Buddha is in all living beings. Ning Ke understood what she meant. Observation was confirmation. Buddha was not a quantum that purely depended on observation to determine its property. He had self-consciousness, so he could appear anywhere. In the world of chessboard, all living beings became Buddha, which was the embodiment of this state. Sang Sang was right. The woman selling vegetables could be Buddha, the golden pond could be Buddha, the willow leaves in the pond could be Buddha, and even the frog Ning Ke kissed a few days ago could be Buddha. This snow mountain was also the Buddha, and it should be the central coordinate of the Buddha in the chessboard world. Only in this way, the Buddha in the superposition state could ensure his own existence. However, it was useless to destroy the snow mountain, because the Buddha could appear in countless places and move faster than light. No one could really find him, and naturally no one could kill him. Ning Ke said, when we came to the Far East, the world began to tremble. Countless Buddhas became nervous and afraid, which proved that this snow mountain was very important to the Buddha. At this moment, there were vibrations coming from the periphery of the golden pond. Countless Buddhas came from the wilderness. Among them were several Mahabodhisattvas who had transformed when they crossed the underworld river. Sensing the changes in the snow mountain, Gautama Buddha revealed his true appearance. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sat cross-legged on the ground, chanting devoutly. The light of Buddha illuminated the dark sky and the foot of the mountain. The light of Buddha was so bright that even the big black umbrella could not cover it in the dark night. A layer of golden light plated Ninkei and Sangsang and then seeped into their bodies. Inspired by Gautama Buddha, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas came to the east to suppress the evil spirits. An earth-shaking roar came from the wilderness. An indigo lion hundreds of feet high roared toward the sky, and the light of Buddha shone again. Ninkei's face turned pale because the light was too bright, because he felt pain, and because Sangsang hiding in his body was very sad in the light of Buddha. He felt Sangsang's weakness. The Bodhisattvas riding the indigo lion and the white tiger were each as powerful as Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. He knew that Sangsang could no longer defeat them. The 10,000 Buddhas worshipping, looking at the countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness, Ninkei laughed and said, "If this snow mountain is not their ancestor, why are they anxious and afraid?" As he spoke, the smoke and dust in the wilderness rose, and a yellow dragon roared down the snow mountain. In front of it was the indigo lion hundreds of feet high. As it ran, the sky and earth changed color. Looking at the indigo lion that seemed to swallow the night sky, Ninkei thought of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's powerful means in the Styx River and could not help but feel uneasy. Now Sangsang was even weaker. How could she be a match for these Bodhisattvas? To his surprise, the indigo lion suddenly stopped in front of the golden pond. Because it stopped so suddenly, its huge body fell heavily, lifting up a lot of black mud. The indigo lion seemed to be very afraid of the water in the pond. It stretched out its front paw to try to step on the narrow mud paths between the ponds. However, its body was so big that one paw was like a palace in the human world, and it was as heavy as a mountain. The mud paths were immediately crushed and the pond water soaked its paw. With a painful and fearful howl, thousands of willow trees by the pond bent down again. The indigo lion retreated in fear, and the golden light of Buddha was constantly emitted from its paw, as if it was burning. The indigo lion retreated in fear, and the wilderness was quiet for a moment. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas did not dare to try to walk into the golden pond. They could only sit cross-legged on the ground and kept chanting. Ninkei did not understand. When he and Sangsang entered the golden pond, although the light of Buddha also made them a little uncomfortable, they were not as painful and frightened as the indigo lion. Why did these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas not dare to enter the golden ponds around the snow mountain? If it was the inhibition set by Buddha, how could it be aimed at his followers and heirs? Sangsang said, "At least the Academy is right about one thing. The Buddhism sect is really disgusting." Buddha entered nirvana and entered the quantum superposition state. Because of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Buddha in nirvana did not have a strong ability to protect himself, so he forbade the disciples of the Buddhism sect from approaching the snow mountain. The thousands of golden ponds around the snow mountain were the inhibition set by Buddha. They were so vigilant against the most devout followers and heirs. Ninkei felt a little emotional. He thought that even if they could really avoid Haoyan's eyes and live like this forever, what was the point? He had excellent eyesight and could see the handsome monk on the back of the indigo lion. He could not help but wonder if Buddha would become this monk if he was in the world. If Buddha is in the wilderness now, can't he remove his inhibition? I can't, because the Buddha who laid down the restriction wasn't the same Buddha as he is now. What's the benefit of setting up such a problem for himself? The benefit is that Buddha in the state of nirvana never needs to worry about being woken up by others. We are here and we have woken him up. Buddha did not expect that we could come here. Even if we were here, it would not affect his state because we are not Bodhisattvas or Buddhas, and we cannot compete with him for the faith of the Buddhism sect. Ninkei looked at the young monk on the indigo lion and suddenly had an idea. Sangsang directly rejected his idea and said, "Buddha is not fixed, so he naturally cannot have the real power. But even if he turns into a bodhisattva, how can you kill him?" Ninkei said, "I am not sad. Anyway, those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can't come in." Sangsang said, "But I am gradually weakening. If this stalemate continues, I will die eventually. I have said many times that I will not let you die." Ninkei looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness and said with a smile, "The arrival of these people and what you have just said prove that my guess is right. Even if your guess is right and this snow mountain is the Buddha's original body, you can't change the current situation because you can't kill Buddha." "Why do I have to kill Buddha?" Ninkei walked to the nearest pond, took out the iron cutlass and cut off a few willows. Then he put down the cutlass, sat under the willow tree and began to weave. He wanted to weave something but his movements were a little clumsy. Sangsang asked, "What do you want to weave?" Ninkei said, "I want to weave a knife." Sangsang thought for a moment and said, Let me do it. Ning Ke smiled and handed over the control of the body. In the house of Yanming Lake, Sang Sang's favorite thing to do was to pick weeping willows by the lake and weave small objects. Soon, a somewhat cute willow knife appeared in his hand. Sang Sang returned the body to him and asked, "Why do you weave a willow knife?" Ning Ke smiled without answering and cut off a lotus flower. He used the lotus flower to collect some clear water from the pond, tilted the lotus branch slightly, and poured the water from the flower on the iron cutlass. The iron cutlass suddenly became extremely sharp, mixed with gold and full of Buddha's will. After doing these strange things, he carried Sang Sang's body on his back, holding the big black umbrella in one hand and the iron cutlass in the other, and walked to the snow mountain. Sang Sang said, "What are you going to do? If you don't answer me this time, I will kill you." Ning Ke said, "I am going to see Buddha." Sang Sang said, "Why do you want to see Buddha? And you have already seen him." Ning Ke said, "I have told you long ago that seeing Buddha is to cultivate Buddhism. If you don't cultivate Buddhism, how can you get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger and delusion in your body? How can you tear open the black sky?" Sang Sang asked, "Do you really want to cultivate Buddhism?" Ning Ke said, "If I can't kill Buddha, I will cultivate Buddhism. I will take his Buddha's nature and cultivate myself into Buddha. I will let all living beings believe in me. What can Buddha do to me?" Sang Sang was a little confused and asked, "How are you going to cultivate yourself into Buddha?" "I've thought about it a long time ago. I have thought about it before I crossed the river." Ning Ke came to a cliff platform and untied Sang Sang's body. He lifted the dark and heavy iron cutlass and heavily chopped the ground of the cliff platform. He said, "I am going to cultivate this Buddha again." "This is what you mean by cultivating Buddhism?" "Cultivating Buddhism? Isn't it just to repair Buddha again? Is the Academy always thinking in such a weird way? Second brother's cultivation is also to repair, but his repair is to fight. I am a real cultivator." Ning Ke chopped randomly on the cliff platform and began to cut the protruding stones on the edge. He said proudly, "Buddha's toes are too wide. I have to make them more graceful. I have not slept for a day and a night. I just came home. I'm very tired. Please vote for me to comfort me." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 990. The Buddhist scriptures once said that it was disrespectful to sculpt Buddha statues. But in fact, there were Buddha statues in countless ancient temples and murals on the walls. The stone Buddha statue on the top of the tile mountain behind the Lank temple soared into the sky. The body of Buddha turned into the Prajna Peak after his death was also a kind of Buddha statue. There were also countless Buddha statues in the Nirvana world in the chessboard. On the contrary, Haotian Taoism, the real ruler of this world, had never erected a statue for Haotian. This situation vaguely revealed some problems. There was a reason for the Buddhism sect to erect countless Buddha statues. Ning Ke wanted to see if he could cut off the connection between Buddha and all living beings through the Buddha statues. This was his Buddhism cultivation. It was just that some things could be thought clearly and said proudly, but it was very difficult to actually do it. The snow mountain was very majestic. If it was the starting coordinate of Buddha in this world or the collection of the original Buddha nature, the broad cliff platform where he stood was just a toe of Buddha. What was more troublesome was that the black rocks between the mountains were very hard. Even if he used the Great Spirit to wield his cutlass, it would be very difficult. The dark iron cutlass kept falling on the black cliff rocks, making thunderous noises and shaking the pebbles. However, it could only cut off a very thin layer of rock skin. At the current speed, it would take Ning Ke a long time to make Buddha's toenail rounder. Others would make a last-minute effort when they are desperate, but you are repairing Buddha's feet. Sang Sang felt that his approach was very incomprehensible. She could not understand how Ning Ke could change the current situation even if he repaired Buddha Mountain. Ning Ke kept chopping the rocks with the iron cutlass and said, "I can't explain it to you clearly. You will understand when you finish cultivating. The so-called Buddhism cultivation is Buddhism cultivation. Buddhism cultivation was Buddhism cultivation. The two cultivations were naturally not the same." Sang Sang said, "Even so, do you know how to repair it? The Academy only knows how to destroy. When will it build?" The Buddha statue on the Wa mountain was directly cut by Jun Mo with the iron sword, and he was cutting the Prajna Peak. From this point of view, the Academy was indeed better at destroying Buddha statues and had no experience in repairing Buddha statues. Ning Ke inserted the iron cutlass into a crack in the cliff and pulled it hard. A rock as big as a watermelon flew out. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "You have a prejudice against the Academy? Who said that we don't know how to build? If we can build Chang'an, why can't we build a Buddha statue? Sang Sang said, you can't even weave willow branches and you want to carve something decent. Ning Ke said, I told you before that I've already thought about it. I've thought about it on the other side of the river. Didn't I use the redwood tree to build a boat? This is training. Using a wooden boat as practice for the Buddha statue? Sounds a little unreliable. How is it unreliable? At most, the Buddha that is cultivated in the end will be a bit ugly, but it won't delay anything. Sang Sang was a little tired. She felt that there was nothing to say, or she didn't want to continue talking to him, so she kept silent. Talking was a one-sided thing and there was no need for dialogue. Ning Ke didn't care and continued to nag, waving the iron cutlass to cut the rocks between the cliffs. The roars continued and the black rocks flew everywhere. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field outside the golden pond couldn't hear what he was saying, but they could see what he was doing. Their expressions gradually became serious. Especially the majestic indigo lion at the front, which was thousands of feet high. It seemed particularly angry and a little uneasy, constantly roaring at the dark sky and shaking its head. The mane on the indigo lion's neck was shining with the light of Buddha, as dense as a forest. As it shook its head angrily, the mane all stood up, looking like countless swords. Ning Ke was resting with the iron cutlass at this time. Looking at the indigo lion's change in the distance, he was a little startled at first, and then he laughed, pointing there and said, Look, that big cat is angry. Sang Sang didn't care about him. Hearing the laughter coming from the mountain, the indigo lion became angrier, and the movement of shaking its head became more and more wild. The violent airflow brought by it even tore the clouds in the sky into pieces. In the horrible turbulence and roaring, the mane on the indigo lion's neck, shining with the light of Buddha, shot out and turned into hundreds of black shadows, breaking through the clouds and flying to the front of the mountain. The thousands of golden ponds outside the mountain were the inhibition left by Buddha, and even the indigo lion couldn't cross it. However, its mane was lifeless and could launch long-range attacks. The indigo lion's mane instantly came to the cliff and fell like rain. There was a dense collision sound and countless gravel splashed everywhere. Every mane seemed to be an indestructible spear. 3 spears made of mane fiercely pierced Sang Sang's body. Ning Ke suddenly became serious and rolled to her side. He opened the big black umbrella and forcefully inserted the handle into the cliff. Sang Sang's body was not damaged, but there was a thin white cut on her cheek. Her body was a divine body, so it could be imagined how terrible the power contained in the indigo lion's mane was. Look, they are really scared, which means what I did is really useful. Holding the umbrella handle tightly, Ning Ke leaned on Sang Sang's tall body and whispered in her ear. The indigo lion's furious long-range attacks were still going on. Dull collision sounds came from everywhere on the cliff. 2 big manes fell on the big black umbrella, which made Ning Ke's hand sore. Then, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field also took out their cultivation instruments and threw them to the mountain from a long distance. However, the cultivation of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas was obviously lower than that of the indigo lion. Only a few big Bodhisattvas' magic instruments fell on the cliff and caused a shock. Most of the instruments could not even fly to the cliff and fell over the golden ponds. There seemed to be an invisible cover over the golden ponds. Those Buddha's magic instruments fell on it and were instantly shaken into pieces. They turned into countless golden streamers and scattered around. Those instruments contained the light of Buddha, which made the pond brighter and even the dark sky seemed to be illuminated. Ning Ke squinted and felt Sang Sang's pain in his body. He silently looked at the field. After a long time, the terrorist attacks from the field finally stopped. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were silent. The indigo lion shook its head and roared unwillingly to the sky. Ning Ke closed the black umbrella and stood up to look at the field in the distance. He was angry but also helpless. He could not resist the power of those big Bodhisattvas and the indigo lion. He opened the black umbrella in his hand to the field, which was an insulting gesture. As for whether those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas could understand it or not, it was not within his consideration. He did not need people to understand to curse. Then he looked at the indigo lion whose mane was obviously less and scolded, "Keep shaking. If you can shake off all your rotten hair and become a bald donkey. Our academy specializes in killing bald donkeys." The indigo lion angrily roared back, but it could do nothing to him. Ning Ke was even angrier because Sang Sang's body was almost injured. The mane and the instrument turned into the light of Buddha, which made Sang Sang weaker and more painful. This was unacceptable to him. The light of Buddha between the mountain and the pond was extremely strong. He carried Sang Sang on his back and tied the handle of the umbrella in front of him to make sure that Sang Sang's body was completely covered by the black umbrella. Then he walked back to the original position with the iron cutlass. This mountain was really solid. Even the mane of the indigo lion and the instrument of the bodhisattva could only break a very thin layer of the surface of the cliff, which was of no help to him. Ning Kai carried Sang Sang on his back and held the big black umbrella. He bent down and kept waving the iron cutlass against the hard cliff rocks, like an old farmer in a bamboo hat farming in the hot sun. Farming was always the most difficult activity for human beings. Sweat kept appearing on his forehead. The sweat dripped onto his hands and the ground and mixed with the broken cliff rocks, as if he was irrigating. "I'm really tired." He wiped off the sweat and said while gasping, "Why are you so tired?" Sang Sang said, "I used to plant peppers in the yard in the city of Wei. I'm not tired." Ning Kai felt hurt and said, "That's because your body is weak and cold so you can't sweat. Why don't you try it like me? It's very annoying to sweat everywhere. My hands keep slipping so of course I get tired easily." Sang Sang's voice was a little weak but still emotionless. "You can't do it?" Ning Kai had said before that what he hated most was to be told that he couldn't do it, especially by a woman. He couldn't stand being told that he couldn't do it by his own woman. "That's because you're fat. How can I not be tired carrying such a heavy woman? When we were in the city of Wei, why didn't you carry me to loosen the soil and prune the branches? You have to take the main responsibility." He shouted angrily, "I didn't suffer so much when I carried you on my back when I was young. I don't want you to choose a thin one, but you should at least choose a slim one, right?" Sang Sang said, "You like thin ones?" Ning Kai said, "Is this something I like? I'm just talking about the weight." Sang Sang said, "You still like thin ones?" Ning Kai threw the iron cutlass to the ground and said, "I told you, this is not something I like." Sang Sang said, "The divine body I choose must be perfect. It's just that in front of the gate of the divine kingdom, your teacher injected a streak of red dust into it so it became fat. If you want to blame someone you should blame him." Ning Kai silently picked up the iron cutlass and continued to cut the mountain. Sang Sang said, "Go on." Ning Kai hesitated for a long time and finally said, "A student should not speak of his teacher's mistakes." Sang Sang asked, "You are a Buddhist. How can you get rid of my poison?" Ning Kai said, "You and I are husband and wife. When I become a Buddha you will naturally become a Buddha. Not to mention the poison, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will be our little brothers. How fun it will be." Sang Sang asked, "How did you come up with this idea?" Ning Kai said, "Why do you have so many questions? Just listen to your man. Who am I? I'm the hero of this story and you're the heroine. When in danger, the hero must stand in front of the heroine and solve her problems. In the end the two can live a happy life." "Happy life. I'm a little tired. I'll sleep for a while," Sang Sang said. Ning Kai felt that her voice was a little sweet, as if she had drunk sugar water. Then he also felt that his throat, which was burning because of thirst, suddenly became sweet. He was very happy. Sang Sang began to sleep and she slept for 3 years. When she woke up, Buddha's right foot had been repaired and turned into a very delicate little foot. It looked a little familiar and if it was whiter it would have looked more familiar. Ning Kai worked hard for 3 years and finally had a harvest. He repaired Buddha's foot into Sang Sang's foot. "Thank you very much. I've been working hard. Thank you again." To be continued. If you like this work please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 991. I rarely hit the jackpot at night, which means that I have made great progress in my ability to control it. But sometimes I feel regretful because I am the most emotional when I hit the jackpot. I always think that the chapters 1 hit the jackpot are the best ones, such as this one. Please have a taste. Besides, today is Monday, so please vote for me. Thank you. Through his eyes, Sang Sang saw that Buddha Mountain was the same as before. The cliff plateau had changed a little and the field was the same. The Buddha and Bodhisattva were still chanting. The indigo lion was still angry for 3 years. Sang Sang wondered if it was tired. She suddenly wanted to know how Ning Kai spent the past 3 years. How did I spend the past 3 years? I dug everywhere with an iron cutlass. Don't you know why this mountain is so hard? It's been 3 years and I only made such a piece of land. If the old farmers in the southern kingdom saw this, they would look down on me. But it's really tiring. What should I do if I am tired? Just take a rest. Just like eating when you are hungry. Ning Kai spoke quickly, and his tone fluctuated greatly, as if he was talking about something very surprising. In fact, it was because he had not talked to anyone for 3 years. Sang Sang was silent for a moment, and then she asked, "What do you eat?" In the past 3 years, Ning Ke could only hear the sound of the iron cutlass falling on the cliff, the indigo lion roaring in the field, the sound of the wind blowing the rolling stones, the sound of cicadas and frogs in the pond at the foot of the mountain, and the sound of himself talking to himself. Now he finally heard Sang Sang's voice. His intuition was as if he had eaten a pot of heavenly power pills, and he felt comfortable all over, as if he was floating to the depths of the sky. It was so wonderful. "What do you eat?" "Hey, there are so many delicious things in this poor place. Boiled frogs, fried frogs, roasted frogs, raw frogs, and so on." When Sang Sang was a child, Ning Ke told her that in his world, there was a kind of people who made money by talking. They talked very fast and they liked to rhyme and repeat, or they liked and were good at being talkative. At this time, listening to Ning Ke's long list of words about frogs, she felt that he was probably learning from those people. Ning Ke did not know what she was thinking about because he had no time to feel it. He was just happily talking about his life in the past 3 years. His saliva splashed everywhere, which seemed to be more than his sweat. He said proudly, "Yes, there's oil, of course there's oil. I've squeezed some lotus seed oil from these wild lotus flowers. Whether it's used to mix wild vegetables or to fry frogs, it's very fragrant." Sang Sang said, "You should be a vegetarian." Ning Ke said excitedly, "Don't worry, I have never forgotten to pair meat and vegetables. Stewed lotus root, fried lotus root, freshly peeled lotus seed, crunchy and not bitter at all. Actually, my favorite food is fried cicadas. Whether it's roasted with lotus leaves or fried raw, it's so fragrant. But when I think of third senior sister, I can't bring myself to eat it." 3 years later, he was so thin and dark, looking no different from the poor serfs under the Shenkong temple. On the contrary, Sang Sang felt much better. The 3 poisons of greed, aversion and obsession were still there, but they were calmer. There should be no danger of the poisons breaking out, and she was not as weak as before she fell asleep. Sang Sang could see him and could imagine how hard he had been living in the past 3 years. At this time, listening to his cheerful narration, she felt more and more sorry for him. That kind of emotion was so strong that she felt a little sad. She could shed tears, she would shed them. Ning Ke felt the sadness in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "Don't worry. You know I'm good at living in the wild. Didn't I do this often when I was a child?" Sang Sang did not speak. She thought that no matter how lonely he was in the Min Mountain when he was a child, at least he had her by his side. Now he still carried her on his back, but she was not with him in the past 3 years. Ning Ke was still murmuring. She listened quietly and gradually narrowed her eyes. That was a smile. Then she felt a little warm and gentle, and then she frowned in his heart. Sang Sang was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I'm a little tired. I want to sleep a little longer." Ning Ke did not expect this. After a moment of surprise, he said with a smile, "Okay." Sang Sang began to sleep again. This time she slept for a whole 10 years. 10 years later, Sang Sang woke up. This time, she found that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field had not changed, but the mountain in front of her had changed a lot. Ning Ke had finished repairing the feet of the Buddha with the iron cutlass and was recarving the clothes on the Buddha. The iron cutlass kept cutting between the cliffs, and a line of the sleeves of the clothes slowly took shape. Compared with the clumsiness and stiffness when he first cultivated Buddhism, Ning Ke's technique was much more skillful now. The iron cutlass moved freely, like the most experienced carvers in the small town in front of the Lank Temple. The improvement of the carving technique was exchanged with time and hard work. It had been 13 years and Ning Ke did not know how many times he had waved the iron cutlass. The cliff was full of his sweat. Ning Ke felt that she had woken up. His body was a little stiff. After a long silence, he slowly inserted the iron cutlass into the crack of the cliff, reached out and patted her buttocks. He said with a smile, "You're awake?" "Yes," Sang Sang said. "Then I'll rest for a while." Ning Ke sighed, a little tired and a little satisfied. He untied her and held her in his arms. He walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down, looking at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas had been chanting sutras for 13 years. The golden pond was full of Buddha's light. If Sang Sang had not been cured of the 3 poisons in her body, she would have died in the Buddha's light. The indigo lion roared angrily at the cliff, and the clouds in the sky were suddenly broken. Ning Ke looked at the angry indigo lion and said with a smile, "Why are you roaring in spring? My wife has woken up. She didn't fall asleep because of your anger. Shouldn't I be the one roaring in spring?" Sang Sang looked at the lines on the hem of the Buddha's clothes. It did not look like a kasaya. She asked, Do you need to repair the Buddha's clothes when you cultivate Buddhism? Ning Ke said, I have to do things carefully. How can I make mistakes in such details? Sang Sang asked, is it still a Buddha without a kasaya? Ning Ke said, why must a Buddha wear a kasaya? Sang Sang asked, then what should a Buddha wear? Ning Ke thought of the clothes he designed and said proudly, you will know when I carve it. You will like it. After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, your clothes are also torn. As the world wayfarer of the academy, Ning Ke naturally wore the academy uniform when he walked in the human world. The academy uniform he chose was black, which was very resistant to dirt. Moreover, the academy uniform was very strong and could not be torn by ordinary attacks. Therefore he basically did not change it during those years. He only casually washed it when it was too dirty. When he was imprisoned by Sang Sang in the West Hill Divine Palace and then cut into pieces, he did not have the uniform with him. Later, Sang Sang threw it to him. This black uniform had accompanied him in the world of the chessboard for countless years, but it was still not rotten. During these 13 years the uniform had become tattered. It could be seen how hard he had worked and how many things he had done over the years. Now Ning Ke was very dark and thin. His hands were covered with thick calluses and he looked more like a farmer. But his eyes were very bright. As the poison in Sang Sang's body was gradually removed, his mood became better and his spirit became more determined. He felt stronger and stronger. I have made many new dishes over the years. Feeling that Sang Sang's condition had indeed improved a lot, Ning Ke was very happy. He held her body and pointed to the pond at the foot of the mountain. He said happily, I always thought there were no fish in the pond. Later I found that there were indeed fish in the depths of the lotus field. I made a pot of fish soup. It was so fresh. I have nothing to say. He smacked his lips and recalled the delicious fish soup. Then he became depressed and said, it's a pity that there are too few fish. It's not easy to catch them and I don't have much time. Sang Sang was silent for a long time and said, I am a little tired. Let me sleep a little longer. After saying this, she began to sleep again. No one knew how many years it would take for her to wake up again. Ning Ke looked at her face in his arms with a dull expression. After a long time, he squeezed out a smile with difficulty and said, sleep well. I will deal with things here. Sang Sang kept sleeping, which reminded him of the time when she was seriously ill and dying. It was a shadow in his heart. But thinking that Sang Sang was indeed getting better, he thought that the 3 poisons planted by Buddha were too powerful. It might take some time. He felt a little tired. He sat on the edge of the cliff and looked at the field. He was silent for a long time. The body in his arms was so tall but his back was so lonely. Fatigue and pain were not difficult to bear because there was hope. The most difficult thing to bear in the world was loneliness. He had been cultivating Buddhism for 13 years, but he only said a few words to Sang Sang. This was loneliness. Because of emotional problems, Ning Ke luxuriously gave himself a whole day off. He did not wake up until the morning light rose from the edge of the dark sky and disappeared quickly. He stretched himself, and his muscles and bones rubbed against each other. Then he lowered his head and kissed Sang Sang's chubby face a few times, making a loud sound. Black pig. Black pig. La 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 la. La 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 la. Wahala. La 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 la. La 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 la. Wahala. Black pig. In the lonely song, he carried Sang Sang on his back, tied the big black umbrella, and waved the iron cutlass. He climbed up and down the cliff, skillfully cutting and carving new lines one after another. Buddha had a pair of delicate little feet. Buddha's kasaya gradually changed. It looked a little elegant and simple. It dragged the skirt as if someone had put a large handmaiden dress on her small body. 3 years later Sang Sang woke up. She stared at the familiar maid's uniform in silence. Ning Ke bit a lotus branch and asked, how do you feel? Do I look like this? Sang Sang said, if I wore it again it wouldn't be so loose. Ning Ke said, although your figure has changed in my eyes, you are still the same as before. Sang Sang asked, where are you now? Ning Ke pointed to the peak and said, tomorrow I will start to repair the face of Buddha. Sang Sang was a little surprised and she was surprised that she did not show any joy. She said, much faster than in the previous years. Ning Ke said with a smile, nothing else. I am familiar with it. Sang Sang asked, will it be over after the repair? Ning Ke said, of course. It will be over soon. Sang Sang was silent for a long time and said, yes, it will be over soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 992. Aren't you curious about why I can cultivate so fast? You said that you're good at it. Can't you tell I'm being polite? I haven't heard you speak for many years. Ning Ke was silent for a while and said, I haven't heard you speak for many years either. Sang Sang was also silent for a while and said, then why? Because my guess is right. After cultivating for 16 years, your poison is getting stronger and stronger. Although you haven't woken up yet, it makes me stronger and stronger. Naturally, I'm faster and faster. Ning Ke said happily, of course the most important reason is that my carving technique is really good now. If you give me a piece of rotten wood, I can carve at least a few hundred taels of silver in the human world. Now I'm not only a talisman Taoism master, but also a carving master. No, I'm a grandmaster. Sang Sang gently nodded and looked very calm. Ning Ke was a little surprised and said, I said it's a lot of silver. Why don't you have any reaction? Sang Sang nodded and said after a while, I'm a little tired. I want to sleep a little more. Every time she woke up, she would fall asleep again after saying a few words. Ning Ke was not as disappointed as before. He thought that although the poison in her heart was gradually gone, Sang Sang was still weak and should sleep a little more. Sleep was the best way to restore spirit. Sang Sang had slept for 16 years and he hadn't slept for the past 16 years. He was sleepy and exhausted to an unimaginable degree. He took out the dried frog meat from his arms, tore off a few pieces and stuffed them into his mouth and began chewing. The frog meat was long and tender. As long as it was cooked properly, it would be very delicious. For example, it could be cooked in a spicy pot, boiled with green peppers or grilled. But no matter how delicious it would become wood residue in the mouth of the diner after eating it for many years. No matter how greedy a person was, he would want to vomit after eating frog meat for 16 years. Ning Ke didn't vomit. There was no expression on his face. He chewed mechanically and looked very dull until he chewed all the dried frog meat in his mouth and swallowed it. His miserable childhood experience made him realize clearly that the most difficult enemy for humans to deal with was definitely not bad food, but the lack of food, because starvation was more terrifying than death. Since the end of the last decade he rarely thought about food. Time was too long and loneliness was too unbearable. He spent all his time and energy on cultivating Buddhism. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, so he caught a lot of frog meat in the golden pond and hung them on the cliff to dry under the sun. These frog meat became his main source of food. He didn't need to spend time to process them. When he was hungry he would take some out and eat it. The dried frog meat had no taste at all. No matter how hard he chewed, he couldn't taste any fragrance. It was hard to swallow. He sat on the edge of the cliff and looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness, using their pain as seasoning. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness became angrier and angrier. As he made the Buddha's figure more and more unpresentable and carved a maid's dress for the Buddha, their anger reached its peak. The chanting echoing between heaven and earth became more and more majestic, and the Buddha's light falling on his body became more and more terrifying. The real horror was the indigo lion, which was hundreds of feet high. The front hooves of the indigo lion were covered with blood and mud. It lowered its head and slowly licked its injured front hooves. It didn't roar as it did in the past years, but its silence was filled with great dominance and danger. A few days ago the indigo lion finally stepped into the golden pond. Although it didn't rush to the foot of the mountain and only broke a few ponds, it was shaken back to the wilderness by the Buddha's inhibition. But there was progress after all. The indigo lion didn't become stronger. It was just that the Buddha's statue was gradually deformed under Ning Ke's iron cutlass. The Buddha's Dharma power here was gradually weakened, and so was the inhibition. The thousands of feet high indigo lion stopped healing and raised its head. Its head broke through the clouds and the scene was very shocking. It looked at Ning Ke on the Buddha's statue with a solemn and cold expression, full of determination to kill. Ning Ke was very tired and sleepy. Sang Sang fell asleep again, which made him very sad. Besides, he felt that frog meat was really bad, so he was in a bad mood. He wanted to rest for a while and do something else to relieve the boring and lonely life of cultivating Buddhism. Just at this moment he saw the indigo lion raise its head and provoke in the wilderness, which made him angry. He untied the iron bow and pulled the hard bowstring to the fullest degree. Then he released his fingers without any warning. A round aura turbulence burst out from the bowstring, and the dark iron arrow disappeared without a trace. The next moment, the handsome monk sitting cross-legged on the back of the indigo lion suddenly burst out a big stream of blood from his chest. Then he fell to the ground hundreds of feet away and hit the wilderness with a muffled sound. The handsome monk died, but the Buddha didn't. Maybe the handsome monk was the Buddha in the past 16 years, but when the iron arrow hit him he was not the Buddha anymore. his and Song-Song's judgment was right. The Buddha's position in this world was unpredictable. Even light couldn't catch up with him, let alone the primordial 13 arrows. The indigo lion was shocked by the handsome monk's death, and then it became extremely angry. It roared furiously at Ning Ke, who was on the cliff. The clouds in front of the lion's head were instantly shaken into countless tiny wisps of clouds, and countless golden lotuses in the golden pond fell down one after another. It was unimaginably powerful. Ning Ke also roared at the indigo lion. His roar was like thunder exploding in the field. There were no words, but it was filled with an extremely domineering aura, extremely wild and unrestrained. As he cultivated Buddhism for a long time, the inhibition left by the Buddha gradually weakened. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness could break through the golden pond at any time. That was why the indigo lion was so confident and cold. But also as he cultivated Buddhism for a long time, the three poisons of greed, anger and obsession in Sang-Sang gradually dissipated. Haoyan slowly recovered in his sleep, and Ning Ke naturally became more powerful. In the end it came back to time or cause and effect. Cause and effect were sequential and so was time. The sequence could determine the shape of the universe and the outcome of this war. Ning Ke was very confident. He knew that the final winner would be himself and Sang-Sang. Killing a Mahabodhisattva with one arrow and roaring at the indigo lion like a real beast, Meng Qi felt great. The boring life of cultivating Buddhism became vivid because of this little episode. The loneliness and rejection that had accumulated in his heart for many years disappeared instantly. He climbed to the bottom of the cliff and continued his cultivation. 2 years later, Ning Ke repaired the hands of the Buddha. The Buddha was not holding a purified bottle or a stick, but an umbrella made of black cliff, so it was naturally a black umbrella. In the beginning, it took him 3 years to fix one of the Buddha's feet. Then it took him 10 years to fix the other foot. At the same time he fixed the hem of the maid's clothes. It took him another 3 years to fix the maid's clothes. Compared to that, his current speed was indeed much faster. Then Ning Ke's cultivation became much slower, because he had reached the top of the mountain and began to repair the appearance of the Buddha. There was no doubt that this was the most critical stage of cultivating Buddhism. The iron cutlass fell very slowly on the plump face and the round earlobes of the Buddha. It was as if the cutlass was picking up a mountain. Because of the cautiousness, it felt extremely solemn. Another 10 years passed unknowingly. The ears of the Buddha were no longer hanging down to the shoulders, but looming behind the newly carved hair. The face of the Buddha was no longer as round as a full moon. It became much thinner and smaller and looked very ordinary. The iron cutlass finally fell on the lips of the Buddha. The Buddha opened his lips silently. Suddenly, countless words of Buddha rang between heaven and earth. The light of Buddha shone brightly on the field. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas chanted together, and a supreme power of Buddha went straight into Ning Ke's chest and abdomen. With a puff, Ning Ke spat out a mouthful of blood, and his eyes suddenly dimmed. At the same time, he felt that Sang-Sang in his heart was frowning slightly and in pain, as if she was about to wake up. He knew he was wrong. Without hesitation he chopped hundreds of times and directly cut off the mouth of the Buddha. The tightly closed thin lips were cut off, and then the sound of Buddha and the power of Buddha disappeared quietly. The cultivation of Buddhism was finished. Now the Buddha was dark, thin, small, and dressed in a loose maid's dress. Sang-Sang woke up, looked at the Buddha and said, "You still like her more?" Then Shich in this sentence was not Mo Shanshan, although Mo Shanshan had a pair of extremely thin lips and liked to close them tightly. Sang-Sang said that the Shich he liked more was Black Sang-Sang. Ning Ke smiled and said, "I have seen you like this for 20 years in the human world, so of course I like you more. In the future when I see you in the human world for a long time, I will naturally like you more." He looked at Sang-Sang's face carved by the black cliff stone and laughed happily. Sang-Sang said, "She doesn't have a mouth." Ning Ke said, "Anyway you don't like to talk." Sang-Sang said, "How can I teach the world if I don't talk? How can I seize the hearts of the masses and become a Buddha?" Ning Ke said, "I can speak for you. I can be a chatterbox when I need to." His cultivation of Buddhism was finished, but he had not become a Buddha yet. There were only a few remnants of the inhibition left by Buddha. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field had entered the periphery of the golden pond in the past 10 years, and the indigo lion was not far from the foot of the mountain. The indigo lion's body was covered with wounds, and its 4 hooves stirred up the mud at the bottom of the pond, as if it was dyed with ink. It slowly and firmly moved toward Buddha Mountain, and each step was as heavy as 1,000 pounds. 10 years was enough for Ning Ke to repair his Buddha face and for many things to happen. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas came from the field, and the footprints they left turned into a river, leading to the distant west. A clear river came from the west, and there were countless gloomy auras and countless ghosts and skeletons in it. The river from the west was the Styx River, which was summoned by countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with great perseverance and supreme dharma. It kept diluting the light of Buddha in the golden pond. Ning Ke waved his cutlass and the vermilion bird roared fiercely. Hao Yin's divine flame gushed out from the blade, walked around the foot of the mountain and cut out a bottomless ditch. After the avalanche, countless snow accumulated under the cliff for decades, and suddenly melted when it met the fire. It flowed into the ditch and became a new clear river. The Styx River and the new river met at the foot of the mountain, but they did not merge. They looked at each other coldly and maintained their own auras. No one could move forward. Ning Ke sat cross-legged on the top of the Buddha mountain, closed his eyes and began to meditate. He finished cultivating the Buddha in the mountain, and began to cultivate the Buddha in his heart. He wanted to become a Buddha, the only true Buddha in the world. My wife will be here tomorrow. I hope she can relax. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 993. The mountain was between heaven and earth and the peak was very close to the sky. Ning Ke sat on the top of the Buddha with his legs crossed and eyes closed, as if he could pierce through the dark sky as long as he stretched out his hand. Suddenly, a bright spot appeared in the dark sky above him. It was dim at first and then suddenly became extremely bright. Then it turned into thousands of rays of light and scattered in all directions along the solitude of the sky. There were many pictures flashing in the light. There were devotees kowtowing, charming and dignified heavenly ladies, and strange golden flowers and jade trees. Those were all his Buddhist lands. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field looked up to the sky. With this action, there was a very faint aura overflowing from their bodies and blending into the light. The aura was awareness. It came to the sky with the light, and then sprinkled on the peak and entered Ning Ke's body. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field were extremely shocked. Ning Ke could take away these awareness, which meant that he could accept the faith of the world, which meant that he was becoming a Buddha and would become one soon. In their eyes, this man was certainly a fake Buddha, and this kind of behavior was naturally blasphemy. Extreme anger broke out in the field, and the Buddhas began to resist solemnly. Some Buddhas cut their faces with golden knives and some Buddhas tore their ears. Blood was flowing, and the Buddha's light and power were flourishing. The indigo lion who had already gone deep into the golden pond, let out a low roar and took a step forward with endless Buddha's power. The earth shook and cracked and a very deep crack appeared. With the crack as a line, the ground in the west of the field slowly rose and then slid forward, covering the ground in the east inch by inch, like a big ship rushing out of the dark bottom of the sea. The big ship did not have a stern, and the back was connected to the ground. So the whole west of the field was the hull of the ship. As the bow of the ship moved forward, the field and people standing in the field were also brought into the ship. For decades, countless living beings in the nirvana world had come here from all directions. The number of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field was innumerable, and there were at least millions of them. Millions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were now on the big ship. The sound of sutra was heard, and the celestial devices broke into the purest Buddha's breath. The hull emitted endless Buddha's light. It was the ship of earth. How magical this scene was. The ship slowly rose and emerged from the dark and gloomy sea, slowly but unstoppably moving toward Mount Buddha. The Buddha's prohibition spell between the golden ponds had long been weakened. At this time, it was crushed by the bow of the ship, like ice and snow under the scorching sun. Countless green lotuses and willows were crushed into splinters in the mud, and then covered by the shadow of the ship, no longer visible. As for the croaking of the frogs and the chirping of the cicadas, no one knew where they went. The big ship moved forward slowly and came to the big river at the foot of the mountain. The river bank collapsed and the waves soared into the sky. Half of the river was the Netherworld River, and there were countless resentful spirits and skeletons in it. These resentful spirits and skeletons did not resist the Buddha light emitted by the ship. They were obediently and voluntarily purified into wisps of aura. The resentful souls and skeletons transformed into countless streams of pure aura, once again attaching themselves to the hull of the ship, making the Buddha's aura of the ship even stronger. The ship continued to move forward, breaking through the surface of the river formed by snow and water, and was about to touch the cliff. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas stood on the deck, putting their palms together and looking at Ning Ke solemnly. The indigo lion stood at the bow of the ship and looked at the cliff anxiously, as if it wanted to jump over. When the ship met the mountain, it was unknown whether it could destroy the mountain, collapse the Buddha, and shock Ning-Kei to death. But how could the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and the indigo lion let him continue to become a Buddha after climbing the mountain? Ning-Kei sat cross-legged on the top of the Buddha, in the bun of the black and thin handmaiden. He closed his eyes and felt everything he had experienced. He was at the critical moment of becoming a Buddha, so he did not know what was happening outside. Even if he knew, he could not pay attention to it because he could not afford to be distracted. He knew that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness would not watch him become a Buddha, take away the Buddha's faith and make all things his own. He did not make any arrangements in advance, because he knew that he was not fighting alone. Song Song's body was put aside by him, and the big black umbrella opened. Suddenly Sang Sang opened her eyes. There was a bright light in her slender willow-shaped eyes. She had woken up several times in the past decades, but she had never opened her eyes. Because she had always been in Ning-Kei's heart and had not returned to her divine body. With Ning-Kei's successful cultivation of Buddhism, the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in her body were about to be eliminated. She could finally return to her divine body, and she could finally open her eyes to see the world. Sang Sang stood up, holding the big black umbrella, and looked at the big ship at the foot of the mountain, slightly squinting her eyes. Is this the savior of mercy? She waved her sleeves and the flowers on her indigo dress bloomed again. A terrible hurricane rushed from the peak to the foot of the mountain, and then roared toward the giant ship on the river. The indigo lion on the bow roared angrily, but the roar could not be heard at all, and was poured back into its mouth by the hurricane. It closed its eyes in panic and its mane was blown backward. There were no sails on the big ship, and the robes of countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas standing on the deck were blown by the hurricane, like thousands of new sails. The forward momentum of the big ship suddenly slowed down. This was the boat of the earth, cut from the earth and had infinite weight. Sang Sang waved her sleeves and the wind rose and the wind slowed down the boat. So she had recovered infinite power. However, even she could not completely stop the big ship. The big ship did slow down a lot, but it still kept moving forward, hitting the cliff. The business of the masses is really interesting. Her indigo dress waved slightly, and her figure disappeared from the peak. The next moment she came to the big ship. The indigo lion roared angrily, and its mane was like a sword, ready to bite. Sang Sang glanced at it. The indigo lion suddenly restrained its momentum, showing a timid expression, and turned its head, trembling. Sang Sang walked among the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. She looked at the faces of those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Both the Buddhas and the powerful Bodhisattvas did not dare to look at her eyes, and turned their faces away. She was looking for the Buddha among all living beings. All living beings did not dare to look at her, and the Buddha was avoiding her. The big ship was the earth, carrying countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But she was Haoyan. If she was given enough time, no one knew whether she could find the Buddha or not. The Buddhas made their own response. They lowered their heads, put their palms together, and walked to the bow of the ship. The Buddhas crowded the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas crowded the Bodhisattvas. The big ship became extremely crowded, and Sang Sang seemed to be squeezed out of the big ship. Sang Sang frowned slightly, stretched out her finger, and pointed between the eyebrows of a Buddha in front of her. The body of the Buddha became brighter and brighter, and finally turned into a pure white light body, dispersing and dying. As soon as there was an empty space on the crowded board, a Buddha stepped forward and filled the vacancy. No matter how many Buddhas she killed, there would always be successors. Then those Buddhas began to commit suicide. The Buddha who cut his face with a knife put the knife across his neck, pulled it hard and cut off his head. A pure golden light of Buddha rose to the sky, and then scattered on the board of the ship. The Buddha who stabbed his abdomen with the knife moved the blade upwards and stabbed his own heart forcefully. A ray of pure golden Buddha light gushed out from his body and splashed everywhere. Countless Buddhas died one after another, and the light of Buddha on the big ship was unimaginably thick. Sang Sang frowned slightly, and her face became paler and paler, feeling a little uncomfortable. The three poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession were almost eliminated, but they were not completely eliminated after all. Encountering the method of sacrificing the living Buddhas, the remaining poison in her body broke out again, and the last remaining poison was greed. She looked back to the peak. Ning-Kei sat there with his legs crossed, eyes closed, meditating and did not know what was going on. Sang Sang just turned back and then she came to the peak and stood in front of him. In fact, the last bit of greed will be gone if I kill you. She was silent for a long time, and then reached out her index finger to point between his eyebrows. Ning Kei's eyebrows suddenly became extremely bright, as if transparent. A green seed could be vaguely seen between the transparent eyebrows, which was the linden seed. Ning Kei had been practicing Buddhism on this mountain for decades, but he had been practicing Buddhism for far longer than that. Before entering the chessboard 1,000 years ago, Ning Kei once faced the wall for a day in the cliff yard of Shinkong Temple. He did not wake up until the pear blossom fell on his shoulder. That time marked the official beginning of his journey of practicing Buddhism. It was also at that time that he realized the experience of Master Lotus, and at the same time, a linden seed was planted in his heart. After entering the chessboard, he listened to the morning bell and evening drum in the White Tower Temple, and practiced Buddhism for countless years. Then he practiced Buddhism on the statue of Buddha in the Far East for decades, and gradually deepened his Dharma. The linden seed was no longer in his heart, but on his eyebrows. Sang Sang touched it with her finger, and a divine thought entered it, and the linden seed woke up. A small crack appeared between Ning Kei's eyebrows, and a very thin green stem stretched out from it. It swayed in the wind on the peak, and began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye under the light of Buddha from the big ship. The linden seed sprouted, broke out of the soil, opened branches, and then produced countless green leaves. The green leaves hung in the air above the peak, covering the dark sky and all the light of Buddha in the nirvana. This linden tree grew extremely fast, and it gave people a very arrogant feeling. This linden tree grew between Ning Kei's eyebrows, and it gave people a very strange feeling. Under the linden tree, Ning Kei closed his eyes and smiled. No one knew what beautiful scenery he was seeing in his dream. Sang Sang walked to him and sat in the shade of the linden tree. The light of Buddha could no longer shine on her, and her pale face gradually returned to normal. She closed her eyes and fell asleep again. Her sleep was entering Ning Kei's body. Ning Kei woke up. He looked at the giant ship that was getting closer and closer to the cliff, and looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the ship and said, "The body is the linden tree and the heart is like a mirror." He wanted to preach Dharma to all living beings, but they were unwilling to listen. They wanted to argue against him and expose his fake Buddha face. Therefore, the Buddha's voice sounded between heaven and earth, and on the big ship, "The linden tree is not a tree, and the mirror is not a mirror." It is? I'm not here to reason with you. I'm not the eldest brother. If you are willing to listen to me, it's fine. If not, the Buddhists have their own ways to beat you. The reason I want to tell you is very simple. You must listen to me or you will be beaten and chopped by knives. Ning Kei looked at the Buddhas and said, "I am the only true Buddha. You must believe me." The Buddhas were all angry. Ning Kei said calmly, "You must understand. If you can't, then go to hell." As soon as he finished speaking, a Buddha turned into ashes. The next moment, the Buddha came to the peak and sat cross-legged on a leaf that looked like a futon. The green leaves were the leaves of the linden tree. The linden tree grew between his eyebrows. The Buddha put his palms together and bowed to Ning Kei devoutly. "Thank you, everyone. If it weren't for your encouragement and spur, I don't know how many times I would have stopped writing these days. Spiritual power does exist. Thank you again." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 994. The peak was a Buddha, and he spent decades cultivating it into Sang Sang. There was no Buddha on the surface of the cliff, but there were still some in the depths. Ning Kei turned himself into a Bodhi tree to receive the Buddha and Bodhisattva's letters. The Buddha could no longer keep silent. A sense of Buddha came from the deepest part of the cliff and entered his heart. "I have become a Buddha," Ning Kei said to the sense of Buddha. His expression was very relaxed, as if he was talking to an old acquaintance, talking about the most ordinary things. The Buddha said, "I am among all living beings. You can't find me or kill me, so you can't become a Buddha." The Buddha here referred to the only true Buddha in heaven and earth. Ning Kei knew it was true. Just as he couldn't kill Hao Yin in the world of Hao Yin, he couldn't kill the Buddha in the world of Buddha, let alone find him. "Why are you so serious? I never thought that the inheritance of the Buddha position was the same as the inheritance of the throne in the secular world, which must go through bloody slaughter and torment." Ning Kei said with a smile, "You are a Buddha, but it doesn't stop me from becoming one. I don't want to rule your world. I am not Hao Yin and I have no interest in killing you. I just want to leave." "How can you leave?" "I can become a Buddha by taking away the business of all living beings." "How can I take away the business of all living beings?" I know. Look." Ning Kei looked at the giant boat on the river, stretched out his right index finger and wrote a word on the boat. Sang Sang was in his heart, and a divine psyche followed his finger and fell on the giant boat. The Bodhi tree on the peak began to sway, and the green Bodhi leaves fluttered in the wind, becoming rounder and wider. Ning Ke and Sang Sang cultivated Buddhism, and the method they used was the oneness of heaven and man, which was mysterious and indescribable. Ning Ke's Buddha's wish and Sang Sang's heart of heaven merged together, and it was an irresistible psyche. The psyche fell on a Buddha on the giant boat. The psyche told the Buddha, "You have to believe me." The Buddha naturally resisted such a blasphemous request. He put his palms together, closed his eyes and chanted. However, he couldn't hold on for long, and broke into countless light spots, disappearing on the boat. The next moment, the Buddha came to the Bodhi tree on the peak and sat on the Bodhi leaf that looked like a futon, swaying up and down with the wind. His eyebrows revealed a sense of enlightenment and he bowed to Ning Quebec. At this time, 2 Buddhas were brought to the peak by Ning Ke with the Buddha's wish and became his followers. They closed their eyes and began to chant devoutly, praising Ning Quebec. Ning Ke only felt a very faint but real power entering his body from the Bodhi tree. It made him calm and happy but also felt heavy on his shoulders. He knew that this was probably the power of faith. After countless reincarnations apart from Hao Yin, only the Buddha knew how to collect and use the power of faith. The headmaster of academy should have reached this level, but he was unwilling to do so. With Ning Ke's current state, he was far from being able to comprehend this level of divine sense. But now that he was one with Hao Yin, he naturally understood. Affected by Sang Sang's divine psyche, Ning Ke didn't have time to think. He closed his eyes and blinked away the remaining consciousness of Buddha coming from the depths of the cliff. Then he began to chant with the 2 Buddhas in the Bodhi tree. The Buddha was silent and no one knew where he went. The waves of the river were like angry waves. The big boat struggled to move forward, trying to break the mountain and stop Ning Ke from becoming a Buddha. But it couldn't reach the other side. Because the Buddha on the other side was no longer the same Buddha. Time kept passing. Because no one was watching, no one knew whether it was fast or slow. The Bodhi tree growing out of Ning Ke's body became more and more luxuriant. Countless green leaves grew out of the countless branches, and the green leaves were like futons. More and more Buddhas sat on them as if they were bearing fruits. They were heavy and the harvest was very gratifying. There were more than thousands of Buddhas converted to Ning Quebec. One more Buddha on the Bodhi tree meant one less Buddha on the boat. But there were too many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the boat, and no change could be seen for the time being. Ning Ke didn't know what was going on outside, nor did he know the time. He quietly closed his eyes, scattered the lotus flowers, and casually placed his hands on the cliff rocks on the peak to cultivate his Buddhism with Sang Sang. 8,000 years had passed in the world inside the Buddha's chessboard, and 3 years had passed in the real human world. It was the 5th year of Jingshi in the Tang Empire, and the 3454 year of Daji in West Hill. Another spring came. Willow catkins fluttered in the sky, peach blossoms in the West Hill Divine Palace, cherry blossoms in the Great River Kingdom, and wild flowers in the weeds in the wilderness, but the pear tree didn't blossom. Is it a pear tree or an iron tree? People in the back of the mountain of the academy surrounded the pear tree by the lake. They were annoyed to see the unresponsive branches and the rustling leaves. In the past 3 years they had tried everything they could to open the Buddha's chessboard, and it seemed that they could only wait for the pear tree to blossom and bear fruit before they could enter the chessboard. However, according to eldest brother, the pear tree would blossom and bear fruit every 500 years. How many people could live for 500 years? The pear tree didn't blossom, and neither did the peach blossoms in the meadow in front of the academy. There were very few flowers in Chang, and because there wasn't much rain this spring. The spring thunder roared between the clouds and the air was a little dry. It was strange that there was thunder but no rain. Eldest brother stood on the stone steps in front of the main hall of the palace and looked at the increasingly dense and gloomy clouds in the sky, feeling a little puzzled. Suddenly, a thick bolt of lightning appeared in the thick clouds and struck somewhere in the city with a roar. The God-stunning array sensed it and emitted a clear light. Eldest brother's figure faded slightly and instantly came to the Wanyan Tower. Looking at the temple that was struck by the lightning and the Buddha statue that had become black, he vaguely understood something. He came to the city wall and looked around. He saw that the clouds seemed to cover the entire continent, and lightning struck from time to time, causing black smoke to appear somewhere on the ground. The black smoke was rising from the Buddhist temples. The next moment, eldest brother returned to the back of the mountain of the academy and came to the pear tree by the lake. He quietly looked at the chessboard for a long time, and a sincere and joyful smile appeared on his lips. Eldest brother smiled. Everyone in the back of the mountain was very surprised. These years, eldest brother had been busy with state affairs, preparing for the war, teaching the new emperor, and worrying about Ning Kei's life in the chessboard. It had been very hard for him, and he hadn't smiled like this for a long time. Spring thunder bloomed everywhere in the human world, but there was still no rain. The first 3 halls of the Lank Temple had all been struck by lightning, and the Buddha statue had collapsed. It was like the rubble on the peak of Hua Mountain. The stones in the mountains and valleys were covered with moss overnight, emitting the smell of the sea breeze. Monk Guanhai led the monks in the temple and sat cross-legged in front of the dilapidated hall. His face was pale and he kept chanting Buddhist scriptures. The blind monk was enlightened and kept shouting like a madman. He grabbed the moss on the mountain rocks and shouted, "Something's wrong. I feel something's wrong. Something is going to happen." On the cliff platform of the West Hill Divine Palace, the Abbey Dean sat in a wheelchair and looked at the dark clouds covering the sky and the lightning that struck from time to time in the distance. He said, "Prepare the great sacrifice to welcome the return of our Lord." The war at the bottom of the giant sinkhole in the West Wilderness was still going on. The uprising serfs had grown to tens of thousands, and they were fighting fiercely with the aristocratic armed forces and the monk soldiers of the Shenkong Temple in the wilderness. The sound of arrows rang in the wilderness, and miserable howls rose one after another. There was blood everywhere and death was everywhere. At this moment, a thick bolt of lightning suddenly fell from the dark clouds in the sky. The bolt of lightning accurately struck the Mahavira Hall at the peak of the mountain. With a loud crack, half of the hall collapsed, and the Buddha statue in the hall turned into black powder. Jun Mo held the iron sword horizontally in front of his chest, and politely kept Qin Yin and the elders of the Commandment Hall a few miles away. He looked at the black smoke coming from the peak and said indifferently, "The Buddha was defeated. Can you still win?" After more than 10 days of spring thunder, there was more than 10 days of spring rain. This year's spring rain was not patter, but it was extremely violent, constantly washing the earth that had been ravaged by lightning. The rain fell on the dilapidated Buddhist temple, on the dilapidated Buddhist statues, and on the pale-faced monks, washing away the remaining Buddhist aura. It was also raining in the back mountain of the academy. The rain hit the green leaves of the pear tree and then flowed down, wetting the chessboard under the pear tree and the people who had been watching the chessboard for years. Sixth brother's naked body was covered with water drops. He waved the iron hammer down violently, and as he moved, the water drops were shaken off his body and flew around like arrows. They had been smashing the chessboard for years, and they were exhausted physically and mentally, but they never thought of giving up. Moreover, eldest brother smiled, which meant that the chessboard was about to be smashed. The hammering sound was like spring thunder and the sweat fell like rain. One day, a light sound suddenly came from the chessboard. A thin line appeared on the Tianyuan position of the chessboard. This thin line was actually a crack and the crack was very small. If one did not look carefully, he could not find its existence at all. One day, a light sound suddenly came from his mind. Ning Kei opened his eyes and looked at the big ship that was still sailing to the other side. He was silent for a long time, and then reached out to pluck the Bodhi tree between his eyebrows and smiled. The Bodhi tree had grown extremely lush. The green leaves seemed to cover the dark sky, and not a single ray of Buddhist light could penetrate it. There were thousands of Buddhas sitting on the green leaves. The Buddhas had different appearances and postures, but they were all worshipping him devoutly. The Bodhi tree was so huge, but he lifted it casually and then took 2 steps to the side. At this time, Sang Sang also woke up and walked to him with the big black umbrella. Ning Kei inserted the Bodhi tree somewhere on the peak. This peak was the Buddha, a dark and thin Buddha named Sang Sang, who was dressed in a handmaiden's clothes. The Bodhi tree inserted on the peak was like a flower in Sang Sang's hair. Ning Kei looked back at Sang Sang and held her hand. There was a small white flower in Sang Sang's hair. A dragon needed to be painted to wake up, and a Buddha needed to pick a flower. Ning Kei picked the flower and inserted it into Sang Sang's hair, and the Buddha woke up. The small white flower in Sang Sang's hair swayed in the wind, and the Bodhi tree on the peak swayed. All the Buddhas sitting on the green leaves prayed to her. Ning Kei felt that all the Buddhas were flowing into his and Sang Sang's bodies. He laughed and so did Sang Sang. All the Buddhas on the Bodhi tree also laughed. Sang Sang's smile gradually disappeared, and she became as quiet as the universe. All the Buddhas also fell silent. Sang Sang's expression was indifferent as she looked at every corner of the world, and the world returned to indifference. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the big ship looked a little confused. The indigo lion roared, but it couldn't resist the pressure from the Buddha. With a reluctant whine, it could no longer support its body and knelt down toward the peak. I forgot to write the number of chapters in the last chapter. When I updated it last night, my eyes were really closed. Some readers have been saying that an elephant's nose has no bones. I know this. At the beginning of that chapter, I explained it through Ning Kei's mouth. In the following chapters, I also said that it is composed of broken bones. As for why I wrote a bone nose, it was purely because of the need of fighting beauty. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 995. Ning Kei and Sang Sang immediately became Buddhas of heaven. Before the Buddhas of heaven, all living beings had to bow their heads. However, if they wanted to completely control the world and the chessboard, they would have to take away all the others' business, which would take many years. Ning Kei didn't want to wait any longer, so he reached out and held the hilt. With this simple movement, the world changed again. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the big ship, and the field felt an unprecedented danger. The chanting became more and more shrill, like cuckoo crying blood. They desperately instilled their breath of Buddha into the world, giving out more and more light of Buddha. The light of Buddha between heaven and earth became extremely bright, and more than 10 strands of it even penetrated the heavy green leaves of the Bodhi tree on the peak and fell on Sang Sang, making her face pale. Countless rays of light flashed in the dark sky. There were heavenly flowers, golden branches, and stories of enlightenment. It was the Buddha's kingdom of Buddha and Ning Kei's and Sang Sang's kingdom of Buddha. They overlapped and were indistinguishable. Ning Kei pulled out his iron cutlass and chopped at the dark sky. With a soft sound, the golden light in the sky shook slightly. The pagoda, the temple statue, and the Chionu holding the zither were all cut in half. The cutlass was endless. After cutting the Buddha's kingdom, it fell on the dark sky, leaving a crack of hundreds of miles in the sky above the peak. Even if it was a bucket full of water, it would be difficult for the water in the bucket to flow out quickly if only one cut was made. Generally speaking, another cut would be made at the intersection of the previous cut. Ning Kei waved his cutlass again, and a clear crack appeared in the dark sky again. It met the previous crack in the sky above the peak, covering hundreds of miles of field. The two cracks looked like a word or a wound of the sky. Thousands of Buddhas in the Bodhi tree on the peak closed their eyes, put their palms together, and chanted the Buddhist scriptures loudly, pouring their devout faith and willpower into Ning Kei's body. Looking at the two knife marks in the sky and the word formed by the knife marks, Ning Kei smiled with satisfaction. It had been a long time since the battle with the Abbey Dean. If the time in the world of the chessboard was counted, it might have been 1,000 years. After 1,000 years he finally wrote that word again. Sang Sang looked at the word in the sky and said after a moment of silence, "It's a good word." Ning Kei thought for a while and said, "I can't write it without you." He didn't even know how he wrote the word. It was a mysterious realm that was hard to explain with words. The most fundamental reason was that he and Sang Sang had become one. God came to the human world, so he was able to write the word human. This was a stroke of genius. Rain began to fall from the sky. The rain did not come from the clouds but from the higher sky. Clear water flowed down from the two cracks cut by Ning Kei, forming hundreds of thousands of waterfalls. The waterfalls fell on the field and became a rainstorm. This rainstorm lasted for an entire year. A year later, boundless starlight fell from the two cracks and mixed into the waterfall in the sky. It was suffused with a cold and beautiful luster, looking like some kind of sticky fruit pulp. The star plasma flowed for another year. Ning Kei and Sang Sang looked at the two cracks. He saw the beautiful scenery while she saw the rain and starry sky in the human world. She saw her own world. During the 2 years, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas committed suicide. The Buddha's light in the nirvana fought against the rain and stars from the human world. Sometimes it was dim, sometimes it was bright, and finally it was annihilated. At the last moment, Buddha, who was hiding among all living beings, made the world launch the most powerful attack on Ning Kei and Sang Sang, trying to stop them from leaving. In the rainstorm, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas floated in the air thousands of feet high, surrounding the mountain peak. Countless celestial devices glowed with golden light and approached the mountain peak. The big ship was only one step away from the cliff. In the rainstorm, Sang Sang stood on the peak with her black hair dancing wildly. The flowers in her indigo dress gradually disappeared. She quietly looked at the countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around her and raised her right hand to the sky. She had seen her own world, connected with the rules, and naturally the power of heaven was reborn. She raised her hand, and the rainstorm falling from the cracks in the sky suddenly became bright, because a star in the distant night sky on the other side of the cracks suddenly became countless times brighter. The stars in the Haotian world were not burning stars. The reason why they suddenly brightened was not because of an explosion, but because the distance between the star and the observer was rapidly shortening. A dazzling bright spot appeared in the crack. The bright spot arrived in an instant and easily passed through the crack, the majestic rain, and came to the inside of the chessboard world and the peak. A star fell in Song Song's hand. Song Song's hand shone brightly. Countless extremely bright rays of light shot from the peak to the surrounding fields, easily evaporating the falling rain and continuing to spread. Ning Ke took out his sunglasses and put them on. The celestial devices containing infinite power of Buddha in the sky outside the peak melted and broke in a very short time when they encountered the light emitted by the stars, and finally turned into wisps of green smoke. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas floating in the rain felt the extremely terrible power of heaven and fled to the periphery of the field. But there were still thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who were purified into nothingness by the light of the stars. Starlight sprinkled from the peak, and the river glowed with silver light. It was extraordinarily quiet. The big ship was also motionless. It was still one step away from the cliff, but it could no longer get closer. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas fled to the field behind the big ship in horror. It was dark and dense like a receding tide. The indigo lion turned into a wisp of green light and instantly fled to the horizon. Looking at these scenes, Song Song's face showed no expression. She walked to the edge of the cliff, stretched out her hand into the rainstorm, and slightly loosened her fingers, letting the star fall in her hand. The star came to the foot of the mountain and fell into the river, stirring up huge waves hundreds of feet high. The big ship was shaking and creaking as if it would fall apart at any time. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who were running on the ship were shaken into the sky, and then fell heavily to their deaths. Golden Buddha's blood splashed everywhere. The horrible vibration came from the bottom of the river to the field, and the ground shook at a high speed like a drum being beaten hard. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, cicadas and frogs were like raindrops on the drum, instantly shattered. The stars smashed a bottomless hole deep in the river, and the mud was burned into porcelain chips by the high temperature. Endless underground spring gushed out of the hole, and instantly dyed the river black. The river was overflowing and thousands of golden ponds were flooded. In the storm, it turned into a boundless black sea at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Black Sea set off huge waves hundreds of feet high, and slapped in all directions of the field. Wherever the waves passed, both hard stones and soft willow branches were smashed into the finest pieces. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas rose and fell in the Black Sea, screaming, and then they were swallowed. The indigo lion was shaken into the sky and fell heavily into the sea. Relying on its height of hundreds of feet, it desperately kicked the field at the bottom of the sea, and kept paddling with its forelimbs. Looking at the tragic scene around it, its eyes were filled with confusion and fear. It thought that if the Black Sea was allowed to flood, what could be preserved in this world? The storm was heavy and the world was restless. Only the mountain was silent and stable in the surging Black Sea. Looking from a distance, it looked like Sang Sang was standing alone in the sea. The mountain was the handmaiden statue, and the flower on the peak was the Bodhi tree. There were thousands of Buddhas in the Bodhi tree. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood under the Bodhi tree, watching the sea and the people wandering in misery. Sang Sang saw the indigo lion in the distance and reached out to grab it. The indigo lion screamed and was caught by her to the peak. Being grabbed by the neck, it did not dare to move at all and trembled. It was no longer as powerful as it used to be. Soaked, it was only a foot long and looked like a drowning dog. The raging Black Sea rushed to the distance. It would not be long before the real Styx River and the redwood forest on both sides of the river would become ruins. After a while, Chaoyang City would be destroyed, and the Buddha land would become a real swamp country, unable to regain its former glory. All this was because Sang Sang had picked a star. Sang Sang looked at the tragic scene of the Buddha land without any emotion or pity. She kept using the power of heaven to make the Black Sea more violent. She wanted to destroy the world with the flood. She had been trapped here by the Buddha for more than 1,000 years. If Ning Ke had not woken up, she would have been lost here, unable to find herself, and Haotian would have become a prisoner in the chessboard. This was a humiliation she could not bear. Her indigo dress was full of anger and negative emotions, and she had to vent them in some way. That's enough. Ning Ke said, the grass, trees and stones in this world could all be the Buddha. If you want to kill him, you have to destroy the world. It will take too long and you may not succeed. Sang Sang did not say anything, looking for the trace of the Buddha in the waves and the storm. Ning Ke walked to the edge of the cliff, took her hand and said quietly, "Let's go." After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, "Let's go." Ning Ke turned to look at the thousands of Buddhas on the Bodhi tree, raised one hand to his chest and sincerely saluted, "Brothers? Brothers, I'm leaving." The Bodhi tree swayed gently in the storm, and thousands of Buddhas sitting on the green leaves chanted the name of Buddha calmly. They put their palms together and praised, "Farewell Buddha." Ning Ke and Sang Sang held hands and slowly floated away from the peak. Against the storm and the starlight in the rain, they flew toward the intersection of the two cracks in the dark sky. The indigo lion did not dare to struggle in Sang Sang's hand. It looked at the doomsday-like scene in the Buddha land and felt sad, knowing that it could never come back. At the back of the mountain of the academy, sixth brother was still smashing the chessboard and people were still watching it. The spring rain was like smoke and fog, wetting the pear tree, people's clothes and the chessboard. Eldest brother did not go back to the palace tonight, but stood under the pear tree looking at something thoughtfully. He did not look at the chessboard but at the sky and the stars in the night sky. All of a sudden, a star left its original position, turned into a streamer and came to the ground. In an instant it came to the back of the mountain, broke the cloud gate array and fell on the chessboard. A loud bang resounded. The people around the chessboard were shocked. They wondered why the stars would fall. What would happen if they hit the flowers, grass and people like them? Who could react in time? The meteor fell, and the small crack on the Tianyuan position of the chessboard seemed to widen. Eldest brother looked at the chessboard and said with a smile, "Welcome back. I recommend Fat Tabby Cat, that is, Zhang Yu's new book, Phoenix Throne, Reincarnation of the Sun, No Reincarnation of the Sun and Song of the Sky Sword. The quality of the new book is guaranteed and it is trustworthy. Please enjoy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 996. Ning Ke appeared beside the chessboard. His clothes were ragged and he was soaked. His skin was dark and he was thin and tired. He looked like a refugee fleeing from a famine. He was extremely pitiful. Seventh sister Muyu's eyes turned red. She stepped forward and touched his head. The rest of the senior brothers also surrounded him and kept patting his head to express their complicated feelings. They hadn't seen their beloved youngest brother for 4 years. It was natural for them to be excited when they reunited after such a long time. As for Ning Ke, he had been separated from his senior brothers and sisters for 1,000 years. It was more than a long time. It was as if countless reincarnations had passed. He was so excited to meet them again. He missed them very much after not seeing them for 1,000 years. Ning Ke held fourth brother in his arms and patted his back hard. Then he did the same to fifth brother, sixth brother, 11th brother, Wang Qi and even seventh sister. Finally he walked to eldest brother and bowed to the ground. "Senior brother, I'm back. It's good that you're back," eldest brother said with a smile. His expression was still so gentle and calm, as if he wouldn't care even if the sky fell down. But somehow his voice was slightly trembling. Thinking of the time spent in the chessboard world and how he almost forgot his existence there, Ning Ke had mixed feelings. He said, "I'll never leave again." Beigong walked to him and asked with concern, "What on earth happened?" Ning Ke briefly described his experience in the chessboard world. He mentioned that he was cultivating Buddhism in the White Tower Temple and almost fell unconscious. Then he was woken up by 2 axes. The axe in the ocean of consciousness is Lotus's consciousness. What is the axe in the sky? If it wasn't for the axe that kept striking me, I might not have woken up. Ning Ke said, "Everything has an answer. Now this is the thing that I haven't figured out. Who is striking me and who is saving me?" Hearing this, everyone turned to look at sixth brother. Sixth brother stood beside the chessboard, still holding the extremely thick iron hammer in his hand. Ning Ke understood that the sound of the axe coming from the sky was the sound of the hammer falling. Each axe represented a psyche from outside the chessboard, and that psyche was calling him back. Only then did he know that during the years when he was trapped in the chessboard, his senior brother had been trying to open the chessboard. Thinking of the hard work and affection, his eyes were slightly wet, and he bowed to the sixth brother. Sixth brother helped him up and said embarrassedly, "Everyone's smashed. I'm just good at wielding hammers, so I smashed a little more." Eldest brother is the one who is really powerful. Ning Ke naturally knew this. He bowed again to his fellow disciples around the chessboard. They all looked at Sang Sang under the pear tree. Sang Sang looked at the pear tree quietly. No one knew what she was thinking. When they saw Sang Sang clearly, they became more and more uneasy. Her left hand was behind her back and her right hand was hanging by her side. Her fingers were slightly bent, and she was holding an indigo dog. It was common for a young lady to have a pet, but no one would hold the pet in her hand like a sword instead of holding it in her arms. The indigo dog closed its eyes tightly in her hand, as if it was pretending to be dead. It was dead silent by the lake. The pear tree was blown by the mountain breeze and dozens of water drops fell. Eldest brother looked at her quietly and then reached for the wooden stick at his waist. Fourth brother Fan Yu walked to the iron-making house by the stream, where the river and mountain sandbox was. Fifth brother Song Qian and eighth brother reached out to grab the black and white chess pieces, their fingers trembling. Sixth brother held the iron hammer tightly, and his muscles were like mountain rocks. An embroidery needle appeared between Mu Yu's fingers, and the tactical array of the cloud gate on the mountain road moved slightly. Beigong sat cross-legged with the zither across his chest. Shiman stood behind him with the vertical flute between his lips. In a few seconds, everyone was ready to fight, and they used their strongest means. Because Sang Sang under the pear tree was Hao Yin, the most powerful and unavoidable enemy of the academy. Wang Qi was very distressed. He was good at debating flowers and plants and poisons, but none of them could defeat Hao Yin. Hao Yin wouldn't reason with him, so how could she be poisoned to death? He looked left and right, and finally his eyes fell on the little white flower in Sang Sang's hair, which was slightly trembling in the wind. He said in a trembling voice, "This flower is very beautiful. Where did you pick it?" It's okay. She's still my wife." Looking at the tense situation, Ning Ke said hurriedly. But Sang Sang ignored him, so it was hard to believe that she was really okay, which made him feel a little embarrassed. It was dead silent under the pear tree, and only the mountain wind passed through the holes of the flute and the strings of the zither could be heard. After a long time, Sang Sang finally stopped looking at the pear tree and turned to the crowd. She said emotionlessly, "Because of Ning Ke, I won't kill you today." Hearing this, Ning Ke was finally relieved and his legs felt a little weak. Sang Sang had been rid of the three poisons of greed, anger and obsession, and the power of heaven had come again. No matter how powerful eldest brother and the academy were in the human world, they couldn't be her opponent. Their lives were in her hands. "See, I said it's okay." He patted his chest and said proudly, "I have face." Beigong felt very embarrassed and said, "You've lost the face of the academy." Ning Ke explained seriously, "Live first and then we'll talk about face." Sang Sang reached out her hand and the chessboard fell into her hand. She looked at the people of the academy and said, "I want this." Although she didn't use a question, it was actually a question. The crowd was a little surprised and then they shook their heads. Although the academy liked to do things against heaven, no one really wanted to fight with Hao Yin. It was Beigong who showed a different spirit. He suppressed the nervousness in his heart, and his trembling fingers plucked the strings of the zither, making a tinkling sound. He said, "I say, even if this chessboard is the property of the couple, at least half of it belongs to my youngest brother, right? What do you want to do? Don't you have to get his consent first?" Ning Ke was speechless. He knew why Sang Sang wanted the chessboard. She was trapped in the chessboard by Buddha for 1,000 years, and almost lost her nature. Even he felt angry and depressed, not to mention the proud Hao Yin. Sang Sang wouldn't let it go like this. She didn't destroy the world in the chessboard and she didn't kill Buddha, who was still unknown. She must do something to get peace. But the chessboard was extraordinary, and even Hao Yin couldn't break it in a short time. So what was she going to do with the chessboard? Where would her wrath fall? Sang Sang picked up the chessboard and waved her arm. The flowers on her sleeves bloomed and a gentle breeze blew. The array in tent above the cliff yard was torn open, and the chessboard flew out of the crack. It flew into the sky and turned into a small black spot. Then it turned into a streamer and fell to the far west. In the depths of the western wilderness, the war in the underground world of the giant sinkhole was still going on. Tens of thousands of rebellious serfs fought bravely in the encirclement of countless enemies. Countless lights of Buddha and blood kept splashing. Suddenly, a shrill cry sounded in the sky. The serfs with crude weapons and the soldier monks with iron rods looked at the sky in astonishment. The battlefield became quiet. A straight line appeared in the sky, coming from the far east. It tore the clouds and the air apart and went straight to the Mahavira Hall of the Shenkong Temple on the top of the Prajna Peak. With a loud bang, the Mahavira Hall, which had been half collapsed by the spring thunder a few days ago, disappeared in an instant, turning into a cloud of dust composed of countless particles. The giant peak trembled. Countless yellow temples collapsed, countless Buddha statues were broken, and countless monks vomited blood and died. The terrible vibration spread to the field. Countless war horses neighed in fear and knelt down. The Mahavira Hall was completely destroyed, and only the flat cliff yard was left on the peak. A dark hole appeared in the cliff, and the rocks were eroded by the high temperature into quicksand. Countless dust and sparks sprayed out of the hole, almost touching the clouds. The Xiankong Temple suffered a disaster because Sang Sang threw the chessboard back from the back of the mountain of the academy. She used the chessboard of Buddha to blow a deep hole in the remains of Buddha. The chessboard went through the whole mountain and continued to go to the bottom of the field. It penetrated hard rocks and hot rivers and did not stop. It went to the terrible magma layer. Chapter 997. The peak was in ruins. Broken beams and stones were everywhere. The broken bell kept rolling between the curtains, making a deep sound. The chief monk of scripture was covered in dust. He walked to the cave and tried to find the chessboard by squinting his eyes. However, he couldn't find it. He looked sad. The Xiankong Temple suffered a catastrophe. Countless yellow temples collapsed and thousands of monks were killed or injured. The monk soldiers in the field, as well as Qin Yin and other powerful cultivators of the Buddhism sect, were also affected and injured. But these were not the reasons why the chief monk of scripture was sad. He was sad because he sensed that he would probably never see the chessboard left by the Buddha again, which meant that the Buddha would never come back to the human world. The chessboard broke through the hard rocks and the boiling underground river. It went thousands of miles deep underground and sank into the red magma, where it was burned by the high-temperature underground fire. The chessboard could isolate everything from the outside world. Even the horrible magma couldn't affect the world inside. But now there was a small crack on the chessboard and the magma seeped in through it. For the world inside the chessboard, the small crack was the two big cracks that were hundreds of miles long in the sky. The magma that seeped in was the endless high-temperature fire. The Black Ocean drowned most of the land, and then the tide gradually receded, leaving the devastated world. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas stood in the ruins and looked at the magma flowing down from the sky with despair on their faces. The lava of fire kept flowing down from the cracks in the sky, looking like countless red waterfalls. It was very beautiful but also very terrifying. The lava of fire fell on the field that was still flooded, corroding and producing a poisonous hot mist that instantly enveloped the whole world. Many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas turned black and then died. First, there was the world-destroying flood, and then the heavenly fire of punishment. Countless lives in the world of the chessboard came to an end. Miserable scenes were everywhere, and it looked like the Dharma ending age mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures. Chaoyang City had been washed away by the Black Ocean. Beams, bricks and drowned bodies were everywhere on the muddy and soft ground. The bell in the White Tower Temple couldn't ring anymore. A young monk stood outside the city and looked at the cracks in the sky in the distance. He looked at the Buddha statue of the handmaiden, put his palms together, and walked on the muddy water with a determined expression. The young monk left Chaoyang City and went to the Far East. He looked at the Buddha statue of the handmaiden, put his palms together, and walked on the muddy water with a determined expression. He was going to cultivate Buddhism. Maybe it would take him thousands of years to rebuild the handmaiden statue to look like himself. Even so, he knew he had failed. Hao Yin had left the world and would definitely return to her divine kingdom. But he still had to do it because this was his world. Under the pear tree in the back mountain of the academy, Sang Sang looked at the west emotionless. She couldn't find and kill the Buddha in the chessboard in a short time, and she had to focus on the bright moon in the sky, so she chose to seal the chessboard deep in the ground. The chessboard would be eroded by the high-temperature underground fire, and the Buddha would suffer the pain of thousands of tribulations inside, gradually weakening until he died. She was Hao Yin. She ordered the earth to kill the Buddha who dared to imprison her for thousands of years. Her words were the will of heaven, and even fate could not disobey it. The Buddha could not be born again. She was Hao Yin. She ordered the earth to kill the Buddha who dared to imprison her for 1,000 years. Her words were the will of heaven. Even fate could not defy her, and the Buddha could no longer be born. Ning Ke understood why she said this, and he could clearly feel the strong power of the law of causality revealed in this sentence, but he still felt a little uncomfortable. Aren't the first 6 words a promise only made between lovers? In fact, everyone knew that he was trying to loosen the tense atmosphere by the lake. But obviously the effect was very ordinary. No one would think that he was really the master of the family. The first brother's hand left the stick. Muyu put away the embroidery needle. The fourth brother, Fan Yu, stopped taking the river and mountain sandbox. The sixth brother put the iron hammer at his feet. Song Qian and the eighth brother put back the chess pieces. Beigong played a few scattered zither sounds in embarrassment. Shiman took off his vertical bamboo flute and wiped it, and then put it back into his belt, pretending that nothing had happened. Wang Qi walked to a cluster of flowers and bowed his head, seemingly appreciating it carefully. People from the academy stopped fighting, not because they believed that Ning Ke could defeat Sang Sang, but because they saw the power of Sang Sang when she threw the chessboard and confirmed that she had returned to the real Haotian. Then no one could defeat her. What was the point of fighting if they could not win? Of course, it was also because Sang Sang had said that she would not kill them today. Thinking of the previous scene of the chessboard breaking through the sky, people were shocked. Looking at the tall woman under the pear tree, it was hard to connect her with the dark and thin girl cooking in the back mountain. Eldest brother looked at Sang Sang and said, "Can we talk?" Ning Ke glanced at her and turned to walk to the stream. Although he had a special relationship with Sang Sang, only eldest brother was qualified to negotiate with Haotian on behalf of the academy. The others also left the pear tree and began to do their own things, but no one could really calm down to play chess or play music, because this negotiation was too important for the academy and the human world. The lakeside was very quiet. Fish bravely swam out of the cracks in the stone and the lotus, and swam to the water and gently pecked at the spring breeze. Birds in the forest timidly poked their heads out, still not daring to sing. Eldest brother said, "Staying in the human world is actually a choice." Sang Sang said, "I don't need humble human beings to choose for me." Eldest brother said, "The academy is kind to you." Sang Sang put her hands behind her back and looked at the lake, saying, "Maybe, but you have never been kind to me. Your intuition about fate is sometimes beyond the scope of human beings." Eldest brother said, "My teacher is kind to you." Sang Sang said, "There is no difference between your teacher and Buddha. They both want to make me weak and then kill me. I don't see any kindness." Eldest brother said, "Buddha planted poison in you, and my teacher gave you the meaning of the mortal world. The former will destroy you, but the latter hopes that you can change. My teacher hopes that you can become a human being." Sang Sang remembered that she seemed to have heard Ning Ke say something similar in the chessboard. She frowned slightly and said, "Why should I become a human being? What good does it do for me?" Whether it was Haotian or ordinary human beings, in fact, in the end, any discussion was about interests and responsibilities. It felt a little tacky, but there was no way around it. Eldest brother could not answer this question. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't know what benefits you will get in this process. But I think, since my teacher has arranged this, he must be sure that you will get something you want in this process. But it is not something that I can guess." This was Haotian's world, and she was the ruler of this world. She had everything. No matter how she changed, she could not have more. So what did the headmaster think she could get? No one knew the answer, not even she. The conversation was short and without any result. Sang Sang left the pear tree and walked out of the mountain with her hands clasped behind her back. Watching this scene, the people who seemed to be playing chess and zither turned around at the same time and signaled to each other with their eyes, thinking that no result was probably the best result they could get now. Muyu looked at Sang Sang and asked hesitantly, "Shall we eat first?" Sang Sang ignored her as if she didn't see her. She continued walking expressionlessly. Ning Ke hurried to catch up. The cloud gate array between the mountain paths could easily stop a powerhouse at the peak of the 5 states. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace was able to break into the cliff plateau years ago because there was no one controlling the array, and also because Yu Lian was waiting for him to come in. Now it would not be so easy for the hierarch to enter the mountain again. But for Sang Sang, this tactical array meant nothing. She walked out of the cliff yard at the back of the mountain and came to the front yard of the academy. Ning Ke said to her, "She asked if you want to eat or not. Even if you don't want to eat, you have to say yes. She is my senior sister, and now she is my sister-in-law. You should be more respectful." Sang Sang ignored him and continued walking without any emotion. Ning Ke looked a little embarrassed and followed her in silence. They walked past the old library and went to a secluded place. They crossed the meadow and came to the forest of swords. Sang Sang looked at the straight trees with her hands behind her back. After a moment of silence, she said, "I was here when you climbed the mountain that year. These trees turned into swords and wanted to kill me." Ning Ke said, "I heard from second brother afterwards that it should be a barrier set by the headmaster." Sang Sang said, "No, it was the sword style left by Koharan that wanted to kill me." Ning Ke was a little surprised. This forest of swords indeed had the will of youngest uncle. But Sang Sang was just an inconspicuous handmaiden in the old brush pen shop at that time. Why did the Forest of Swords have a reaction? Kaharan knew me. Interestingly, he knew me at that time. She said it was interesting, but her expression was so indifferent that she couldn't feel the slightest bit of interest. Except for the sword will he left behind, no one knows that I am Hao Tian. Even I don't know. Under the true will of heaven, the person holding the brush doesn't know where the brush will land. This is the stroke of God. Ning Ke sighed and said, yes, you don't know who you are. Of course no one knows who you are. In the end, even the headmaster was tricked by you to go to the divine kingdom. You also tricked me of my youth. Sang Sang didn't laugh. She looked at him and said expressionlessly, I have seen you write many words. I know that you write like a god. In your opinion, what do you think of my writing? Ning Ke didn't understand what she meant. If she was referring to the things that happened in the past, why did she ask him to comment now? Or did she mean that she had written a new stroke? A brand new stroke of genius? He was very uneasy and even felt a little cold. Sang Sang looked at the sky that was divided by the Forest of Swords and turned to walk out of the academy. Ning Ke asked, where are you going? Sang Sang said, Chang'an. Upon hearing this answer, Ning Ke's uneasiness melted like the soft snow in spring. It nourished his heart and made him extremely satisfied. Now, the only thing in the human world that could threaten her was the god-stunning array in Chang'an. She was willing to go to Chang'an, which meant that she might really want to stay in the human world and stay with him. Today I thought of a very interesting plot in bed. I forgot it because I was in a hurry to go to the toilet. I remembered it when I got home. I forgot it because I was in a hurry to go out. So I forgot it again. On the way to the hospital I thought about it for a long time. But when I got there I forgot it again. Then I never thought of it again. It made me feel very uncomfortable. I will record it here as a memorial. Just pretend that you have seen the plot. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 998. In the south of Chang'an, there were willows beside the official road. The traces of the war had mostly been erased by time. Only the injured soldiers with crutches in the tea shop kept reminding people of the past. Sang Sang returned to the city with many memories, but she looked very calm as if she had never left. She walked casually through the familiar streets with her hands behind her back. Entering from the south gate, they turned to the west of the city and went to the gambling house with Ning Quebec. She did not collect her dividends, but looked at the gamblers' joyful or desperate expressions in silence. Next, Sang Sang went to the House of Red Sleeves. Ning Ke never left her side, so he had no time to see Mistress Jian. He met Xiao Qiao in a quiet courtyard behind the building. Xiao Qiao looked at Sang Sang with a confused expression. She vaguely remembered seeing this tall figure behind the veil of the Divine Hall of Light. However, before she could say anything, a cup of tea appeared in front of her. Sang Sang said, "Drink this cup of tea." Xiao Cao's thoughts became more and more confused. She did not understand why Sang Sang wanted her to drink this cup of tea. Ning Ke said, "Drink it. She won't hurt you." Xiao Qiao picked up the cup and drank it. She had no idea what the tea tasted like. Then she felt her body become light and warm and she wanted to sleep. Looking at Xiao Qiao who had fallen asleep, Ning Ke asked uncertainly, "Is she immortal just like that?" Sang Sang ignored him and left the House of Red Sleeves for the Grand Secretary's mansion. Perhaps because she did not want to see them, or because she did not want her indigo clothes to be stained with women's tears, she let Xing Jing and his wife sleep and let Ning Ke feed Mrs. Zeng a cup of tea. Ning Ke held the cup and said, "If your mother is immortal, what will your father do? After a few decades your father will die and your mother will live alone. It will not be a good thing." Sang Sang thought for a while and said, "Then bring this cup of tea back?" Ning Ke said, "Can you have more positive energy? Can't you make more tea for your father?" Sang Sang said, "First of all, I am Hao Tian. I have no parents. They are just the former homes of my body. Secondly, not everyone is qualified to drink this cup of tea." Ning Ke looked at her and did not say anything. She made another cup of tea. Ning Ke smiled, carried the teacup to Grand Secretary Zheng Jing and fed him. As he walked out of the Grand Scholar Manor, Jing Jiu asked earnestly, "It seems that the cup of tea can really make people live forever?" Sang Sang said, "I said I would grant them immortality." Ning Ke said, "Then you still owe me a few cups of tea." Sang Sang said, "Since Jun Imo doesn't want to drink, I won't force him." Ning Ke sighed helplessly. He pointed at himself and said, "What about me?" "You've never liked drinking tea," said Sang Sang. Ning Ke was annoyed and said, "Who doesn't want to drink the tea of immortality?" Sang Sang said, "I told you not everyone is qualified to drink this tea." Ning Ke was really angry and said, "You are my wife. If I am not qualified to drink your tea, who is?" Sang Sang said nothing and walked toward the east side of the city. Ning Ke chased after her and kept saying, "It's just a cup of tea. Why are you so stingy?" Sang Sang remained silent. Ning Ke begged, "Please do me a favor and give me a cup." Sang Sang still said nothing. Ning Ke was furious and shouted, "If you don't give me tea, I won't cook for you." Begging and threatening along the way were boring and one-sided conversations. The two returned to Lin 47th Street. They pushed open the door of the old brush pen shop. There was no dust in the room. They walked into the small courtyard and scared away the old cat on the windowsill. Sang Sang walked into the kitchen and took a look. Then she walked back to the front berth and sat down. She knocked on the table. Ning Ke understood what she meant. He reluctantly went to the market to buy ingredients and made 2 meat and 2 vegetable dishes. Then he filled 2 big bowls of fragrant white rice. In the past, Sang Sang cooked, except for the time when she ran away from home. Now she was Hao Yin, so she naturally wouldn't cook anymore. He had already gotten used to the change of status in the family since he was in the Divine Hall of Light. After dinner, Ning Ke washed the dishes. Sang Sang walked out of the old brush pen shop and into the shop next door. For some reason, the business of the shops on Lin 47th Street was not doing well. Many shops had moved away a few years ago. But because the old brush pen shop had been closed these years, those shops gradually moved back. The shop next to the old brush pen shop was still the fake antique shop. Sang Sang walked into the fake antique shop and said to Boss Wu, "You can take a concubine now." After saying this, she turned around and left. Boss Wu sat in an old-fashioned wooden armchair with a teapot in his hand. Looking at the empty shop door, he wondered if he was blind and deaf. What did the girl say just now? He didn't hear it clearly, but someone in the shop heard it clearly. Aunt Wu rushed out from the backyard with a wet dishcloth in her hand. She stared at Boss Wu and asked, "What's going on? You want to take a concubine?" Boss Wu was a little confused and said, "Are you talking about taking a concubine?" Aunt Wu's eyes turned red and she said in a trembling voice, "I heard it clearly from inside. How dare you lie to me? Tell me clearly, whose woman is she?" Boss Wu was very innocent and said, "I don't even know that woman." Aunt Wu's breath suddenly became heavy and her voice also became rough. "How dare you bring a woman you don't know home?" Boss Wu said angrily, "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about it." Auntie Wu grabbed Boss Wu's collar with her left hand and slapped him with the wet rag in her right hand. She cursed, "Wu Laowa, you bastard. Now you are rich, but you don't even know your name after running a shop in Chang'an for a few years. If it weren't for my dowry, you would be a little hooligan in Eastern County. How dare you take a concubine? Let me tell you, there is no way." In the antique shop on Lin 47th Street, there was a perfect family farce. From time to time, there were dramatic sound effects, screams and the sound of furniture falling on the ground. Sang Sang didn't know these things and she didn't care about them. In her opinion, as long as Ning Ke became the emperor of the Great River Kingdom, the bet would stand. As for whether Boss Wu could keep it or not, it was his own business. At this time she was shopping with Ning Ke in Chang'an. They went to Chenjinji Cosmetics store, but they didn't buy cosmetics. They went to the Eastern City Market, but they didn't buy vegetables. They went to the fragrance workshop, but they didn't buy pen and paper. They went to the building of pines and cranes, but they didn't ask for noodles. She was a tourist who traveled all over Chang'an without leaving a trace. She just left new footprints in the streets where she had left her footprints, removing the traces of the past. Chang'an was the god-stunning array. She had lived in this city for many years, and the aura she left behind had greatly affected the god-stunning array. Now she was walking to repair it. The next morning she and Ning Ke returned to the house by Yanming Lake. She went to the lake and stood on the embankment, thinking for a moment while facing the lotus field on the lake. Then she plucked a few soft willow branches and made a dozen little things at a speed that was too fast for the naked eye to see. Among the little things she made were bamboo baskets, tables, chairs, and a frog. After she finished, she didn't hand them to Ning Ke, but threw them into Yanming Lake. Looking at the willow things floating in the lake and gradually sinking, Ning Ke was silent. When he saw the willow frog also sink to the bottom of the lake, he broke the silence and said, "Buddha is not a frog and I am not a prince. It seems that there are no fairy tales in this world." Sang Sang returned to Chang'an and did these things to revisit and repay her debt. Back in the Divine Hall of Light, she had decided to cut off her ties with the human world in this way. Now she was still doing this, which meant that she still wanted to leave the human world and return to the divine kingdom. Many years ago, in Min Mountain, beside the bonfire at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, you also said that fairy tales are lies. The ugly duckling can become a swan not because of its efforts, but because it is a swan. I am Hao Yin, so I can't stay in the human world. No matter how hard you try, you can't change it. After a long silence, Ning Ke said, "You know, I still have many tricks." Sang Sang looked at the lotus field and said, "Yes, you can use the God-stunning array to suppress me." Ning Ke said, "You know I won't do that." Sang Sang said, "Because you know very well that even if the God-stunning array is repaired, it can't kill me now." Sang Sang said, "Why? You wanted me to return to Chang'an because of this." Ning Ke said, "We just want to use the God-stunning array to cut off your ties with the divine kingdom. The academy has never thought of killing you." Sang Sang thought of what Li Man Man said at the back of the mountain of the academy. After a moment of silence, she said, "Why? I killed Kohaoren, and your headmaster is destined to be killed by me." Ning Ke said, "I've explained it before. It was Hao Yin who killed youngest uncle, not you. Now you are a living person, not a cold rule. As for the headmaster, he didn't want you to die." Sang Sang looked at him quietly and said, "I don't know what the headmaster of the academy is thinking, but I know you are lying. The academy knows that the headmaster of the academy will fail. That is why they want me to repair the God-stunning array. Only when the God-stunning array is repaired can the academy pose a threat to the divine kingdom and help your headmaster." Ning Ke did not say anything. Sang Sang smiled and turned to leave the lake. The spring light shone on the city wall. She came to the city wall. She looked at the distant south at the mountain with blooming peach blossoms and said, "Do you know your sins?" The West Hill Divine Palace was on the Peach Mountain. Hundreds of priests and thousands of deacons, as well as countless devout believers of Hao Yin, were carrying out a grand sacrifice. This sacrifice had been going on for many days. It started when the spring thunder bloomed. Even the endless spring rain did not stop the sacrifice, and the devout prayers never stopped. Today the prayers suddenly stopped, because a thunderous voice suddenly sounded in the sky. It was full of irresistible power and the most profound sense of majesty, as if heaven was admonishing the human world. "Do you know your sins? Did you make it? Today is Monday. Please vote for me. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 999. In the previous chapter, Sang Sang said that the Buddha said that when the mountain has no edges and the heaven and earth are together, he can see the Buddha. The original song of the UFU school was Mountain Without Hills. I didn't think much about it, so I wrote Mountain Without Edges. Was it influenced by the song? Thanks to reader Zhu Jingyan for the correction. No one knew where the voice came from or why it rang in the sky. But the next moment, everyone knew that it was Hao Yin's voice. Only Hao Yin's voice could be so majestic. Only Hao Yin's voice could reflect such a vivid picture in the consciousness of the devout Hao Yin believers and touch their souls. Everyone on the cliff plateaus and the front plateau of Peach Mountain knelt down with their foreheads touching the ground. They wished they could bury themselves in the dust so that they could show their respect and love for Hao Yin. Hierarch Xiong Chimo was standing between the gauze curtains and leading the believers to pray. His figure looked very tall in the light. Hearing the voice, he immediately threw himself to the ground as humble as a dog. It was said that his voice was as magnificent as thunder. But compared to the voice that rang in the sky, it was nothing, even blasphemy. In front of a stone house in a remote corner of the cliff plateau, the Abbey Dean left the wheelchair and knelt down. He supported his body with his thin arms and trembled. But his expression was calm and proud. The middle-aged priest finally left the wheelchair and knelt behind the Abbey Dean. Long Qing knelt even further behind. His face was as pale as snow and his eyes were full of fear. He knew clearly what the Abbey Dean had done was disrespectful to Hao Yin. Now that Hao Yin had left the chessboard of the Buddha, how could he not be afraid when the power of heaven came back to the human world? Sang Sang's voice broke through the clouds and fell on Peach Mountain. It resounded between heaven and earth and was reflected by the sky and the ground. It spread so far that even the whole continent could hear it. Countless people were awakened by the voice from the sky. An old man leaned against the wall and looked at the gray sky. His turbid eyes were full of confusion. He wondered what was going on this year. Was the spring thunder going to strike again? Why did it sound like someone was talking? Some children rushed to the window of the study room, pointing at the sky and talking excitedly. Their chattering sounded like a group of birds. The teacher, who was sleepy in spring, was woken up. He picked up the ruler and prepared to teach these naughty students a lesson. The children said in unison that the sky had spoken, but they were beaten a few more times. The small town at the border of the Song Nation and the Yen Nation also heard the sound coming from the sky. The people rushed to the only long street in the town. They looked at the sky uneasily, not knowing what had happened. In the butcher's shop, the butcher hid his face and head under the chopping board with his broad-oiled knife raised high above his head. Hoof bones kept falling from the chopping board, and every time one fell, his body would tremble. The drunkard was more afraid than the butcher. The drunkard sat in the tea-house and kept drinking from the flagon. Even though he could hold his liquor well, his eyes became blurred, but his face did not turn red. Instead, it was terribly pale. The butcher did not participate in the Abbey Dean's plot against Hao Yin, but he did. He watched Hao Yin and Ning Ke enter the Shenkong Temple, and even stopped the academy from breaking the chessboard. Now that Hao Yin had returned and asked the human world if it had sinned, how could he not be afraid? Other than getting herself drunk, what other way could she do to keep him from losing his mind? Chao Xiaoshu stood at the door of the tea-house and looked at the gray sky. He asked confusedly, "What happened?" The drunkard finally put down the flagon and said in a trembling voice, "This is something you can't understand. You'd better stay away from me. Otherwise, the power of heaven is unpredictable, and you may die at any time." Chao Xiaoshu turned around and looked at him with a complicated expression. The drunkard kept drinking, trying to get himself drunk. He said vaguely, "We are all doing this for her own good. But what if she doesn't appreciate it?" Taoism seemed to have done nothing when Sang Sang was trapped in the Buddha's chessboard. But it was exactly because of this that they had sinned. They saw Hao Yin in danger without saying anything, which was a great sin. Moreover, Sang Sang figured out what Taoism was trying to do after the incident. She was asking the human world for a crime, and she was asking the guilty ones. The most guilty one was the Abbey Dean, Qin Mao. Long Qing, who was kneeling behind him, was pale and sweating profusely. The middle-aged priest was trembling slightly, as if he could no longer maintain his kneeling posture. The Abbey Dean was already a cripple. His cultivation state was not comparable to that of Long Qing and the middle-aged priest, but he was calmer than them and even had a smile on his face. He looked at the sky and said with a smile, "I am not guilty." Song Song's voice sounded again in the air in front of the cliff plateau. "You colluded with the Buddhism sect and tried to make me sleep. That is a great sin of disrespect. How can you defend yourself?" This time she did not let the whole human world hear it. Only those on the cliff plateau could hear it. Therefore they were even more frightened. Many divine priests and deacons were shocked and could not hold on any longer. They fainted. The Abbey Dean said, "Absolutely not." Sang Sang said, "You don't admit that you wanted to kill me?" The Abbey Dean said, "I wanted to kill Sang Sang, not Hao Yin." Sang Sang said, "I am Hao Yin." The Abbey Dean said, "I believe in Hao Yin, not the woman named Sang Sang." Sang Sang said, "What if I cannot wake up in the chessboard?" The Abbey Dean said, "Hao Yin is omnipotent. Moreover, this is your will. I'm just carrying out your will. I believe you should understand my piety now." Song Song's voice did not come for a long time. The spring breeze blew the peach blossoms on the mountain. It was silent. No one dared to make a sound. After a long time her voice came again. "As a mortal, it is a sin to defy the will of heaven." The Abbey Dean said calmly, "If it is a sin, I am willing to commit a heinous sin. Since you are my follower, you should listen to my will. The will of Hao Yin has never changed. It is to protect the order of the world at all costs." "Even if I change my mind?" "Yes. Because outside the world is the cold underworld. If you change your mind, it means the destruction of the human race." "That makes sense." Song Song's voice did not come again after these two words. After a long time, Long Qing dared to move his eyes away from the ground soaked with sweat. He looked at the Abbey Dean not far away, his eyes full of awe and confusion. Hao Yin was worthy of awe. He could still talk so calmly when Hao Yin was accusing him. The Abbey Dean was even more worthy of awe. He could not even understand where the Abbey Dean got his courage from. The Abbey Dean stood up with difficulty. He looked at the far north and the direction of Chang'an. After a long time of silence, he said, "Let the sacrificial ceremony continue. Hao Yin is going back to the divine kingdom." Different from Long Qing's imagination, the Abbey Dean was not afraid of talking to or even debating with Hao Yin, because he was the one who knew Hao Yin best in the world. Hao Yin had to reason with human beings because she was the reason. On the city wall of Chang and Sang Sang thought about the world Ning Ke described and confirmed that what Chen Mao said made sense. Just as he said this was her will. Reasonable? What kind of logic is that? Ning Ke said, if this is a sin, am I not afraid of committing a heinous sin? Don't you feel disgusted by this typical non-mainstream tone? How can you hear the reason? Sang Sang said, if there was no reason, he would be dead. Ning Ke said, although Taoism did not do anything, it is obvious that he knew that the Buddha's chessboard would bring you danger. But he did not say anything. What is the reason? Sang Sang suddenly said, have you ever thought that I wanted to enter the Buddha's chessboard? What he did was just carrying out my will. What crime did he commit? The spring wind on the city wall suddenly became very cold. Ning Ke turned around to avoid the spring wind and the question because he really felt cold. Sang Sang looked at him quietly and said, you understand? Ning Ke reached out to touch her forehead and said, you are sick. Sang Sang smiled and said, do you have any medicine? Ning Ke said seriously, 11th brother is best at making medicine. Can I get some for you? It was all a joke because he only dared to joke at this moment. The conversation between Sang Sang and the Abbey Dean made his heart colder and colder. Even her smile could not bring him warmth. Her smile was so calm and indifferent. As I said, you want me to enter Chang and because you want me to build the God-stunning array. You want to break the sky and help the headmaster to defeat me. I know everything you are thinking about. You can't lie to me. Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, if you are guilty, what should you be guilty of? Ning Ke gradually calmed down and looked at her. He said, don't forget, I also know everything you are thinking about. You want to use the God-stunning array to reopen the gate of Hao Yin's divine kingdom. You can't lie to me. Sang Sang said, you are lying after all. Ning Ke said, you have lied to me more than I have lied to you. Just like what we said in the academy yesterday, you have lied to my youth, so don't lie to my feelings. Sang Sang said, feelings? I know what it is, but I didn't lie to you. Ning Ke said expressionlessly, you can't get rid of the sense of worldly affairs that the headmaster left in your body. You can't cut off the affection between you and the human world and me. So you can't go back. You and I traveled the human world together, but we couldn't find a way. Until we went to the Lank Temple and saw the broken Buddha statue on Hua Mountain. You understood the trap that Buddha set for you. So you resolutely went to the trap and got yourself poisoned by the 3 poisons of greed, anger and obsession. You went to Buddha and said that you wanted to kill Buddha, but it was all a lie. We went to the Xiankong Temple and were trapped in Buddha's chessboard. It was your own choice. Because by getting rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger and obsession, you got rid of the sense of worldly affairs. He said bitterly, Buddha thought he had calculated the cause and effect. He didn't expect that in your eyes, he was just a sharp carving knife. You wanted to use this carving knife to cut off your flesh and get rid of the dust on your body so that you can return to the divine kingdom. But have you ever thought about what it means to me? Sang Sang said, this is a war. Why don't you understand? These things seem to have nothing to do with me. But the one who spent a long time with you in the chessboard and got you poisoned by greed, anger and obsession, is me. The one who picked up the carving knife and turned you into a Buddha, helped you get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger and obsession, and got rid of the sense of worldly affairs, is me. It's me, it's still me. Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, the 1,000 years in the chessboard were my feelings. You used me and cheated my feelings. My dear, why don't you understand? His smile was very light as water, and his emotions were very thick as blood. Now, the story related to the chessboard and the cause and effect finally came to light. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1000. Yes, that was the truth. Sang Sang couldn't get rid of the secular world in her, so she looked for Buddha and came to the world in the chessboard. In that world, she was deeply in love with Ning Ke and had the 3 poisons of greed, aversion and obsession. Ning Ke wanted to save her, so he had to get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, aversion and obsession in her body. Greed, aversion and obsession were the emotions in the secular world. Buddhism cultivation was the 3 poisons of greed and obsession. The Academy didn't expect this, and Buddha didn't expect things to develop like this. No one could guess what she would do in countless reincarnations, because God's will was unpredictable. Buddha saw the cause and effect, and she was the cause and effect. She used Buddha's plan to break the Academy's plan and find the possibility in the impossible. This was Hao Yin's great wisdom and Ning Ke's great pain. Ning Ke stood on the city wall and looked at the spring breeze. He said indifferently, in the small courtyard in Chaiyang City, "Did you feel happy when you saw me happily buying vegetables and cooking every day? I've called many people idiots in my life. I thought they were really idiots, but now I think I am the stupidest idiot." Sang Sang walked to him and looked at the world in the spring breeze with her hands behind her back. She said, "I didn't lie because I didn't know it either. Only when the cause and effect are fixed can I understand my will." Ning Ke sneered, "Do you think I can believe this?" Sang Sang said, "It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. As I said in the academy yesterday, no one knows how things will develop, even I don't know. This is the real stroke of God. It is indeed a stroke of God. In fact, during the last years in the chessboard I vaguely guessed something, but I didn't want to believe it, so I never asked you. During those years I practiced Buddhism on that mountain. Although you were on my back, I was always alone. I was so lonely that I wanted to die." Ning Ke looked at the pedestrians on the city wall and the busy market and said, "Every time you woke up, you refused to talk to me. At first I thought you were tired, but later I found that it was because you didn't want to talk to me. I was very disappointed and began to be vigilant because it proved that your emotions were fading, or that you were afraid of something. What are you afraid of?" He turned to look at Sang Sang and said calmly, "You are afraid to be with me, so you can't bear to cut off the connection with the human world? If it's this kind of fear, I'll feel somewhat relieved." Sang Sang didn't answer his question but said, "Since you have vaguely guessed it and started to be vigilant, why didn't you say anything or do anything? God can predict everything. It's scary, but I'm not afraid because the God-stunning array is still in my hands. You shouldn't have told me this. I'm not sure that you've gotten rid of the worldly will in your body. The Academy might use the God-stunning array to blast the sky, and then you could use it to return to the Divine Kingdom. But now it's impossible." Ning Ke said expressionlessly, "Even if you become the cold and heartless Haotian, as long as you can't return to the Divine Kingdom, you can only return to your original state. Just like the days we spent in the Divine Hall of Light, we will inevitably continue to be entangled together, and we will still be the same pair of burnt papers." Sang Sang said, "Since I told you this, it means that even without the God-stunning array, I have other ways to leave the human world and return to the Divine Kingdom." Ning Ke said, "A cow can be boasted to the sky, but a pig can't." Sang Sang said, "It's a black pig." Ning Ke said, "No matter what color the pig is, you can't go back." Sang Sang said, "In the world of the chessboard, I experienced the suffering of the worldly will, cut off the connection with the human world, and saw the big ship with the divine will." Ning Ke felt a little uneasy when he thought of the horrible big ship in the nirvana. "Buddha is different from your teacher. Your teacher merged with the human world and even I couldn't find him. Buddha, on the other hand, gathered people to help him, and created another world without my eyes. Both of them are great divine senses. I can't merge with the human world, so I can only use the Buddha's method to obtain the power to open up the world." Sang Sang said, "The power of all people is faith. I'm the Lord of the world and I have countless devout believers. However, for tens of thousands of years, I've been indifferently overlooking the divine kingdom. The power comes from all people, but I've never thought about how to use and strengthen this power. In this aspect, I've learned a lot from the Buddha." Ning Ke said, "Is it that big ship?" Sang Sang said, "The Buddha delivers all people from suffering, and all people help him to cross the nirvana realm. I want all people to deliver me, so I have to deliver all people first, and then I can take the big ship to the nirvana realm." Ning Ke asked, "Where is your nirvana realm?" Sang Sang said, "I came from the divine kingdom, so the nirvana realm is naturally in the divine kingdom." Ning Ke looked at the gray sky and said nothing. Sang Sang reached out to somewhere in the south. The academy was dozens of miles away from the city. The indigo lion, which was taken out of the chessboard by Sang Sang, was confronting the big white goose by the stream. Its hair stood up like swords and it kept growling to threaten, but it dared not to act rashly. It looked at the meadow in the distance from time to time. The big white goose was a bit tricky for it, and there was an old yellow bull dozing on the meadow. It knew very well that if the old yellow bull opened its eyes, it would be doomed. The indigo lion couldn't understand why it could meet so many terrible fellows as soon as it came out of the chessboard. It was completely different from the information it got from the chessboard. This world was too scary. Suddenly, an invisible force broke through the cloud gate array, landed on the cliff plateau, grabbed the indigo lion and disappeared. The big white goose looked up to the sky and found that it couldn't see the abominable newcomer anymore. It shook its head in boredom and went to the stream to take a bath. The indigo lion appeared on the city wall in Sang Sang's hand. Its mane was pulled painfully, and it was worried that it would really become a bald donkey, but it dared not to resist. Sang Sang waved her sleeves to the outside of the city wall, and a breeze came to the human world. During the right to light, the human world also had such a breeze. But compared with that year, the breeze today was quieter, gentler, and had more breath of life. The breeze came to the divine halls of West Hill first. The peach blossoms in the valley were fluttering in the wind, and instantly became more beautiful. The believers kneeling on the cliff plateau and the front yard were suddenly refreshed by the breeze. All the negative emotions such as anxiety, fear, sadness, and despair were all purified. The blind felt that the world in front of them was gradually brightening, and the deaf faintly heard some sounds. The sounds came from the lips of countless believers. It was the sound of chanting scriptures. Under the leadership of the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, more than 100,000 divine priests, deacons, and devout believers kept chanting the scriptures loudly. The words in the scriptures were beautiful, and the rhymes overlapped, forming an extraordinarily sacred feeling. It was the final chapter of the divine halls of West Hill, the sutra of transcending the world and ascending to immortality. The spring breeze filled the human world, and the chanting spread everywhere. Tens of thousands of Taoist temples in various countries and countless Taoists began to chant the scriptures that everyone was familiar with. The spring breeze lingered in the forest, gently brushing the hanging clouds, and finally turned into rain. The rain fell to the human world with a golden luster, but it was extremely clear when it fell to the ground. The spring rain fell on the peach mountain, wetting the woods and darkening the color of the peach blossoms. It fell in a remote place of the Revelation Institute, and a pile of dry firewood in the corner was also wet. A skinny little priest was taking shelter from the rain. He was the most inconspicuous servant in the divine halls. Even though it was such an important sacrificial ceremony, no one had informed him. He was a forgotten existence. Seeing that the pile of firewood was wet, the little priest was a little anxious. He covered his face with his sleeves and ran out. He wanted to move the pile of firewood into the kitchen, and did not care that he was wet by the rain. The clear rain fell on him and turned into countless mottled golden light spots. Then it seeped through his dirty Taoist robe and began to slowly nourish his body and Taoist heart. In the small town between Song and Yen, the drunkard held the door and looked at the rain falling from the sky. His right hand holding the flagon was slightly trembling, and he let the rain wet his face, whose age could not be guessed. The rain fell on the broken eaves of the butcher's shop, flowed down along the cracks, dripped on the chopping board and wet the white and fat pig trotters. Then the butcher's face was wet with blood. They clearly felt that the filth that they suppressed in the deepest part of their souls was washed away by the rain falling from the sky. Their rotten bodies even showed a fresh vitality. The drunkard left the tea house and the butcher walked out of the butcher's shop. The two came to the only straight street in the town and stood at the two ends of the street. Standing in the rain, they were moved and determined. The spring breeze filled the human world, and the spring breeze turned into rain. Naturally, the rain fell everywhere. Both the West Hill Divine Kingdom and the coast of the East Sea were covered by the drizzle. Even the depths of the wilderness in the far north had a rain. The rain fell on the golden tent and made a pitter sound, as if someone was casually beating a broken war drum. The wilderness was so quiet and the sound was so clear. Chanyu, with a solemn expression, knelt in the rain with all his wives, sons and dozens of generals of the royal palace, and kept praying for the Tingri heaven to grant them courage. The national master and dozens of high priests knelt on the highest meadow, and stretched out their hands to receive the rain and the blessing from the sky. The national master's aged face was washed by the rain, and it was visible to the naked eye that he became younger. The bodies of the high priests were also wrapped in a faint golden light. The national master slowly closed his eyes and knelt in the rain, quietly feeling the vitality and the unfathomable power in the rain. He was peaceful and full of awe. It was also raining in the Shenkong temple. Junimo looked at the iron sword that was soaked in the rain and slightly raised his eyebrows. The iron sword was soaked in the rain and became darker. It was plated with a layer of luster and became much sharper. His clothes were soaked and he became much sharper. Junimo knew why. A few years ago he said in front of her that he would not accept the gift from Haotian, but he had no choice but to accept what she wanted to do. On the wilderness outside the pit, the big black horse lowered its head and dragged the heavy carriage, walking in the messy poplar forest. Suddenly, a spring rain fell and wet its body, and all the tiredness and loneliness disappeared. It squinted at the depths of the spring rain, and suddenly felt some reluctance. Similar scenes happened everywhere in the human world. Some cultivators cried in the rain. He, who could not enter the see-through realm after decades of hard cultivation, finally crossed the threshold today. Some Taoist cultivators who lived in seclusion in the deep mountains even reached the knowing destiny state overnight. Those who were seriously ill were saved and slowly woke up. Those who were about to die were saved and no longer suffered. They peacefully returned to the divine kingdom. Those who believed in Hao Yin would be rewarded, because this spring rain was her gift to the human world. After the spring rain, the little Taoist in the Revelation Institute would no longer be a servant. He would become a genius in the cultivation world and the most valued powerhouse of the new generation in Taoism. The drunkard and the butcher would no longer linger on. They would live a fresh life in the human world before they were taken to the divine kingdom. The national master of the Golden Tribe royal court and many powerhouses of Taoism were cleansed by the rain and became more powerful. Buddha only saved those who believed in him. Not everyone could receive Hao Yin's gift. The monks in the Shenkong temple were very embarrassed by the spring rain. The Abbey Dean, who was kneeling in the rain in front of the stone house on the cliff plateau of the divine halls of West Hill, was still a cripple, and his face was pale from the cold rain. All the followers of Taoism benefited as long as they were sincere believers of Hao Yin. The Abbey Dean was the leader of Taoism in the human world, but he was excluded from the process. He knew that it was not because his faith in Hao Yin was not strong enough, but because Hao Yin still remembered his disrespect. Looking at the human world in the spring rain, the Abbey Dean smiled bitterly, but his eyes were still firm. As long as the human world was still peaceful, it was not a big deal even if he was abandoned by Hao Yin. Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang in Lingang, tens of thousands of followers of the new stream in front of the South Jin Imperial Palace, Yi Su in the shabby Taoist temple in the Kingdom of Song, and dozens of neighbors who were listening to his preaching. What were they thinking? The spring rain also fell in Chang'an. The clear rain was full of vitality, which was a mercy to the human world. Therefore the God-stunning array did not react. Xiao Qiao slept in the house of red sleeves for a whole day and night. Mistress Jian invited all the imperial doctors in the palace, but none of them knew what was wrong with her. She woke up when the spring rain fell. She walked to the window and leaned against the railing. She looked at the raindrops falling from the eaves and thanked them silently in her heart. Zheng Jing and his wife also woke up to the sound of the spring rain. They walked to the rain pavilion in the garden hand in hand. Looking at the spring rain, they felt that something had happened and felt sad for no reason. The spring rain fell on the human world. Hao Yin blessed hundreds of millions of followers and delivered all living beings from suffering. Their faith became firmer and even more fanatical. Countless invisible spiritual auras were born from the palaces and huts, and from the souls of all living beings. They flew toward the rain and went straight to the sky. This was the return of all living beings to Hao Yin. Hundreds of millions of pure spiritual auras came to the south of Chang'an. Regardless of their strength, they blended together harmoniously, disturbing the rain and brightening the dark clouds. On top of the city wall, Ning Ke stood beside Sang Sang. He first smelled a very light fragrance and then the whole human world smelled it. Then there was the sound of exquisite and ethereal music. In the strange fragrance and divine music, countless golden petals fell down. Countless spiritual auras lit up the clouds, and a huge ship appeared faintly. The ship was also golden. Countless followers condensed their psyches into this big ship, ready to send Hao Yin back to the divine kingdom. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 1001. Sang Sang's feet left the city wall and floated toward the big ship in the clouds. Ning Ke hugged her leg and did not let her go. Just like many years ago in the wilderness, when the clouds broke and the gate of Hao Yin's divine kingdom opened, she floated to the sky, and he stood on the field and hugged her leg without hesitation. At that time, Sang Sang floated to the sky with him, and it was the headmaster who grabbed his leg in the end. Now the headmaster was no longer in the world. He did not want her to leave, but how could he fight against the whole world? Sang Sang floated away from the city wall and into the sky. Ning Ke did not make her stay. He only kept her shoes, the cloth shoes that he bought for her. Sang Sang landed on the bow of the ship and threw the indigo lion into the clouds. The indigo lion grew in the wind and became thousands of feet tall. The hair on its neck shook and it roared. The clouds broke and the sky appeared. It struggled to drag the big ship to the sky. Chang'an responded. The God-stunning array released a fierce killing intent that seemed to be able to tear the sky apart. It condensed in the streets and buildings of the city and was ready to attack at any time. Countless Tangs came out of their houses and poured into the streets. They looked at the bright sky in the south, the incredible giant ship and the indigo lion in the bow, and their faces were full of awe and fear. The god-stunning array did not attack the giant ship because it was outside the city. Although the Tangs in the streets were frightened, no one put down their weapons. Some even started to pick up stones. Sang Sang stood on the bow with her hands behind her back. The infinite light projected her tall figure on the ground, making the top of the city wall dim, just like Ning Kei's mood at this time. The indigo lion dragged the big ship out of the clouds and flew to the sky. It was slow at first, but it was obviously speeding up. Somewhere in the sky, a golden line appeared. The golden line was not the gate of Haotian's divine kingdom. The gate of the divine kingdom had been destroyed by the headmaster years ago. The golden line was the shore that Sang Sang wanted to reach. As long as there was a shore, there was no need for a door. If she had supreme wisdom, she would be able to reach the other shore. Her wisdom had long been proven by the headmaster of Academy, Buddha, Ning Kei, and even herself. Just like that? Could it be that everything is fake? Ning Kei stood on top of the city wall and looked at the giant ship in the sky. He asked expressionlessly, "The Buddha I have cultivated for you for decades is fake? Is it a lie that I brought you up with all my effort? That famine was fake? The entire Min Mountain was fake? Is the city of Wei fake or Chang'an fake?" Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship in silence without turning around. "Let's not talk about Min Mountain, let's not talk about the past. We've been together for 1,000 years, but you don't even give me a cup of tea and want to leave. Do you think it's appropriate?" Ning Kei looked at the ship that was getting further and further away and said with a smile with difficulty. Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship, still silent. Ning Kei slowly held the hilt of the iron cutlass and stared at her back. He said word by word in a low voice, "I don't think it's appropriate, so don't even think about leaving." With a swoosh, he pulled out his iron saber and slashed at the huge ship in the sky. He and Sang Sang cultivated Buddhism in the Buddhist chessboard together. Sang Sang understood the method of mercy and salvation, but he also learned to condense the will of all living beings. The incomparably majestic chi of heaven and earth was gathered by the god-stunning array and poured into his body through the array eye pestle. Countless cutlasses in the city flew out of their sheaths and thousands of knives appeared in the world again. Two extremely sharp knife marks rose from the city wall of Chang and then came to the sky in a flash, forming a clear character human. The place where the two strokes met was the bow of the ship. Years ago in Chang'an, the Tangs were united. He used the power of the god-stunning array and gathered the will of millions of people to write a character human in the sky and killed the Abidine. In the Buddhist chessboard, he cultivated Buddhism on the peak and obtained the faith of thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. With the power of Sang Sang, he wrote a character human in the dark sky and broke the 1,000-year dilemma. This was the third time he wrote this character. What would the result be? Ning Kei knew that his knife talisman couldn't cut the giant ship under Sang Sang's feet because it was a boat of faith. So he cut the space before the bow of the ship. There was an invisible rope between the indigo lion and the bow of the ship. Ning Kei wanted to cut the invisible rope. Two knife marks appeared in the sky and covered the giant ship. Sang Sang finally turned around, her expression unchanged. She stretched out her finger and pointed at the knife mark. She stretched out a finger. The finger was very slender and the surface of the fingertip was small. Ning Kei's two knife marks were about to cut the whole sky. The place where they met was a few miles wide. However, her fingertips were able to envelop the space within a radius of several miles. Countless airflows sputtered and the bright clouds were torn into countless pieces. The big ship continued to move forward steadily. She broke Ning Kei's human talisman with one finger. The two strokes gradually moved away and finally fell apart in the sky. They scattered into countless talismans like a chaotic wind and then were purified into nothingness by the light. Looking at this scene, Ning Kei was silent. At the moment when the iron knife was cut, he felt that the two knife marks were not pure enough and it was very difficult to write the human talisman. But he couldn't understand why. Because of fear? Yes, no matter how immortal the Abidine was, in the eyes of the strong Tangs, he was still a human being. But Haotian was Haotian. How could they not be afraid? There were millions of people in Chang and in the streets and many of them had weapons in their hands. They all wanted to protect their country but not all of them dared to attack Haotian. If the will was not united, then human talisman couldn't be fully exerted. If the will of the people could not be united, how could the city withstand the finger of heaven's power? In the chessboard you could write that character and break the sky because I was in your body and those Buddhas were worshipping you. You have to know that even in Chang'an, all living beings are still my believers. How can they obey your will? I'm no longer here, so how can you write those words again? Sang Sang stood at the bow of the boat and looked at him calmly. She said, but I am very pleased that you can comprehend the will of the people. Look at the boat under me carefully. Maybe you will comprehend more. Ning Ke was silent for a while and said, pleased my ass. Comprehend my ass. Sang Sang said, when we meet again, it will be a matter of life and death. If you want to defeat me, you have to learn how to write that character. Then we will meet again. Ning Ke said expressionlessly, by that time, I might have died of old age. Sang Sang looked at him quietly and was about to turn away. Just then Ning Ke suddenly said, do you think this is the end? Sang Sang slightly frowned. Ning Ke laughed and said, there was no butcher in Min Mountain back then, and I didn't let you eat any meat with hair on it. I can't beat you and you can't run away either. Don't forget I've been losing to you for so many years, but when can you really leave me? After saying this, he turned his wrist and stabbed the knife into his chest. He stabbed very hard, and the dark and sharp knife directly pierced through his hard flesh and bones. It went deep into his chest and pointed at his beating heart. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chitian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.